I hired a cleaning lady while my husband was supposedly away on a critical business retreat. An hour into her shift, she called me, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. There is someone crying in the attic and it is not the television. I rushed home and broke the padlock on the one room in our house I was strictly forbidden to enter. What I found inside made my blood run cold, and the revenge I planned would tear his perfect life to shreds. My name is Diana, 34 years old, 7 months pregnant, and a forensic financial auditor. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your entire reality shattered by the person you trusted most. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I made him pay. It was a Tuesday afternoon and the air conditioning in my downtown office was barely keeping up with the blistering summer heat. I was knee-deep in complex corporate tax discrepancies when my cell phone rang. It was Maria, the new cleaner I had hired to help out around the house since my growing belly was making deep scrubbing impossible. I answered expecting a routine question about which cleaning supplies to use. Instead, I heard heavy breathing and muffled, terrified sobs. "Miss Diana, you need to come home right now." Her voice was a frantic whisper. "There is a strange noise coming from behind the locked door upstairs. It sounds like a girl crying." I told her to get out of the house immediately, lock the front door behind her and wait in her car until I arrived. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs as I grabbed my purse and waddled to the parking garage as fast as my swollen ankles would allow. The drive to our upscale suburban neighborhood usually took 40 minutes in afternoon traffic, but I made it in 25. My mind was racing through every horrific possibility, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Bradley, my husband of 5 years, was the brilliant CEO of a rising tech startup. He was charismatic, exceptionally handsome, and fiercely protective of his private spaces. He had left that morning for what he called a make-or-break executive business retreat in Denver. But my entire profession trained me to look at the cold, hard numbers, not the sweet words people use to cover their tracks. Just 2 days prior, while reviewing our joint credit card statements to prepare our upcoming quarterly tax filings, I had noticed a glaring, undeniable charge. 2 first-class tickets to the tropical Bahamas, booked under his name and the name of his 27-year-old executive assistant, Sienna. I had spent the last 48 hours quietly building a confidential file, meticulously gathering digital evidence of his affair, while pretending everything was perfectly fine over breakfast. I genuinely thought his infidelity was the absolute worst secret he was hiding from me. I thought I was driving home to find his mistress's belongings stashed away. I was so incredibly naive to think the betrayal stopped at a simple office romance. I pulled into our wide driveway, the tires screeching aggressively against the pristine concrete. The house was a massive 4-bedroom modern farmhouse, a grand symbol of the success we had built together, mostly funded by my initial savings. Maria was waiting in her rusted sedan across the street, pointing a trembling finger toward the second-floor window. I unlocked the heavy front door and marched inside, tossing my keys onto the granite kitchen island. The house was dead silent. I climbed the wide oak staircase, one hand resting protectively on my pregnant belly to steady my balance. When I reached the second-floor landing, I stopped and stared at the door at the very end of the hallway. It led to the unfinished attic space. Since the day we bought this expensive house, Bradley had kept it padlocked shut. He firmly claimed the previous owners had left dangerous exposed wiring and severe structural damage behind, promising he would eventually hire professional contractors to fix it. He was so intensely adamant about the supposed danger that he made me swear never to go near it. Now, standing just inches from the heavy steel padlock, I could actually hear it. A faint, weak whimpering sound like a wounded animal trapped in a cage. I did not hesitate for a single second. I walked straight into the master bedroom, grabbed the heavy steel hammer Bradley kept hidden in his bottom tool drawer, and marched back to the attic door. My raging pregnancy hormones and pure adrenaline fueled my swing. I smashed the heavy hammer against the padlock once, twice, 3 times, until the cheap metal bracket splintered loudly and gave way. The broken lock clattered heavily to the hardwood floor. I took a deep breath, gripped the cold brass door handle, and pushed the heavy door open. The wave of suffocating heat hit me like a physical wall the second the door swung open. The central air conditioning of our expensive home did not reach this unfinished space. The temperature up here had to be over 90 degrees. Dust motes danced in a single narrow shaft of sunlight that managed to pierce through a grime-covered skylight. The smell was the first thing that made me gag, a pungent, unmistakable mix of stale sweat, unwashed laundry, and desperation. I stepped inside, the rough wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. In the darkest corner of the room, shoved carelessly against the exposed pink fiberglass insulation, lay a stained twin mattress. Huddled on that mattress, clutching a dirty pillow to her chest, was a frail, terrified teenager. It was Lily. She was Bradley's 15-year-old half-sister. Lily suffers from severe cerebral palsy. She cannot walk without assistance and requires specialized medical equipment, consistent physical therapy, and dedicated around-the-clock professional care. At least that was the elaborate emotional story Bradley had fed me since the day we met. He had masterfully painted himself as the ultimate tragic hero, the devoted older brother bravely taking on the heavy burden of her legal and medical guardianship after their father passed away. For the past 2 straight years, I had watched exactly $15,000 leave our joint checking account on the first of every single month. It was a massive financial drain, but I never once complained. Bradley swore the money was paying for her room at an elite premier medical facility down in Boca Raton, Florida. He always insisted on handling the visits by himself, claiming he wanted to protect me from the emotional toll of seeing her decline, especially after I became pregnant. Now looking around this makeshift prison, the horrifying mathematical truth crashed over my entire reality. My mind, trained for years to hunt down corporate financial discrepancies, immediately connected the sickening dots. There was no luxury facility in Florida. There were no professional nurses or physical therapists. The meticulously crafted invoices he had shown me were completely forged. He had been locking his severely disabled teenage sister in our sweltering attic, leaving her alone in the dark while he went to the office. Beside her mattress sat a rusted metal bucket serving as a crude toilet, and a splintered wooden crate holding nothing but a few cans of cheap soup and a manual can opener. He was starving her. He was locking her away like an unwanted animal to steal her medical care funds. The $15,000 a month from our joint account, plus whatever massive sum was sitting in her inheritance trust, was all going directly into his pockets. All of it. The hundreds of thousands of dollars meant to keep this poor, vulnerable girl alive and comfortable had been ruthlessly siphoned away. He stole her life to artificially inflate his failing tech startup and to buy $50,000 diamond bracelets and first-class island vacations for his 27-year-old mistress. Lily shrank back against the rough brick chimney wall. When she saw me, her wide, sunken eyes filled with absolute paralyzing terror. Her thin arms trembled violently as she tried to pull a moth-eaten blanket over her head to hide. My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces, replaced instantly by a cold, calculating rage. I slowly dropped the heavy steel hammer to the floor and sank to my knees, completely ignoring the thick layer of dirt soaking into my expensive maternity clothes. "Do not be afraid, sweet girl," I whispered, forcing my voice to stay as soft and steady as humanly possible, despite the venom boiling in my veins. "It is me. It is Diana. I am not going to hurt you, Lily. I am going to get you out of this awful room right now." She let out a soft, agonizing whimper and slowly reached one frail, shaking hand toward me. When I gently took her fingers in mine, her skin was burning hot to the touch. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration. How many days had she been trapped up here alone while he paraded around downtown Seattle playing the perfect wealthy CEO husband? My vision swam with a red, blinding fury. This was no longer just a case of adultery or simple financial fraud. This was a severe, sickening crime. This was felony elder and dependent abuse. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. My fingers were shaking with pure, unadulterated rage as I unlocked the screen and quickly opened the keypad. I dialed 911. I had my thumb hovering right over the bright green call button. I was ready to bring the entire local police force and the FBI down on my monster of a husband. Then the heavy oak front door downstairs slammed shut. The booming sound echoed through the silent house like a cannon shot. Heavy, hurried footsteps began marching across the hardwood floor of the foyer, heading directly toward the main staircase. Someone was home. I scrambled to my feet, my joints protesting, and moved quickly out of the sweltering room. I gripped the wooden banister and looked down the staircase. There, standing in the marble foyer with a designer handbag draped over her arm, was my mother-in-law, Brenda. She was 62 years old, aggressively Botoxed and obsessed with projecting the image of a wealthy, perfect matriarch. She had used her emergency spare key to let herself in. Brenda looked up and saw me panting at the top of the stairs, my maternity blouse covered in dark attic dust. Then her sharp eyes darted to the shattered steel padlock resting on the hardwood floor. I expected her to gasp. I expected her to ask what had happened. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure condescending fury. "Diana, what on earth are you doing up there?" Brenda snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "Bradley explicitly told you that area was strictly off limits." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Off limits?" I screamed, my voice echoing through the massive house. "Your son has your disabled teenage daughter locked in a boiling attic. He has been starving Lily while stealing her medical funds." Brenda did not even flinch. She calmly set her handbag on the console table and began walking slowly up the stairs, her high heels clicking menacingly against the wood. "You are being overly dramatic as usual," Brenda said, waving her perfectly manicured hand in the air. "Keep your voice down before the neighbors hear you. This is blood family business, Diana. You need to stay out of things you do not understand." I backed away as she reached the landing. "Blood family business." I choked out, nausea rising in my throat. "You knew about this. You knew he was torturing her." Brenda let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "Do not use such ugly words. Nobody is torturing anyone. Bradley is a visionary. His technology company is going through a critical funding round. Do you have any idea how bad it would look to his investors if he was drowning in personal medical debt? That facility in Florida was draining his capital. We simply brought Lily home where we could manage her care more efficiently. I helped him move her up there myself." My jaw dropped. This woman who sat in the front row at church every Sunday had actively helped her son imprison her own daughter just to protect his fake millionaire image. "Efficiently," I yelled. "She is sleeping on a stained mattress next to a bucket. You are both going to federal prison." I raised my cell phone, my thumb pressing down hard on the bright green call button to connect with the 911 dispatcher. Before the call could even ring, Brenda lunged forward with terrifying speed. Her manicured claws dug viciously into my wrist, twisting my arm until a sharp bolt of pain shot up to my shoulder. I gasped, stumbling backward against the hallway wall. Brenda violently snatched the phone from my grip, ending the call instantly. She shoved the device deep into her designer pocket and stepped right into my personal space, her face inches from mine. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little brat," Brenda hissed, her eyes wide and unblinking. "You are not calling anyone. My son gave you this beautiful house. He gave you this perfect life. If you dare breathe a single word of this to the authorities, I will personally make sure you lose everything, especially that baby you are carrying." My hands instinctively flew to protect my swollen belly. "You cannot threaten me," I whispered, though my voice was trembling. "Oh, I absolutely can." Brenda smiled, a cold, calculated smirk that chilled me to the bone. "If the police show up, Bradley and I will swear under oath that you have suffered a severe psychotic break. We will tell them you locked Lily in that attic yourself in a fit of jealous, pregnant rage. Who do you think the police will believe? The wealthy, respected tech CEO and his devoted mother, or the hysterical, mentally unstable pregnant wife who has a history of stress at her demanding auditing job?" I will call Child Protective Services myself. I will have your baby taken away from you the exact second it is born, and you will be locked in a psychiatric ward for the rest of your life." The sheer audacity of her threat paralyzed me. She was not bluffing. Brenda had spent decades cultivating relationships with local judges, politicians, and police chiefs in our wealthy suburban community. She hosted charity galas and funded local campaigns. She had the social capital to completely destroy me before I even made it to a courtroom. I was heavily pregnant, physically exhausted, and standing alone against a family that operated like a ruthless criminal syndicate. "You are monsters," I whispered, my back pressed firmly against the cold hallway wall. "Both of you." Brenda reached out and forcefully patted my cheek, her rings scraping painfully against my skin. "We are survivors, Diana. We do whatever it takes to protect our legacy. Now you are going to go downstairs, clean yourself up, and act like the grateful wife you are supposed to be. Bradley will be home on Sunday. Until then, you will not go near that attic, and you will not attempt to contact anyone. If you try to buy a new phone or run away, I will know." She turned around and walked back down the stairs, leaving me frozen on the landing. My chest heaved as I struggled to draw oxygen into my lungs. The horrific reality of my situation finally settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I could not simply run away. If I fled now, Bradley would easily manipulate the legal system, drain my remaining bank accounts, and hunt me down. I had to outsmart them. I had to use every single financial auditing skill I possessed to dismantle their entire empire from the inside out. I needed proof. I needed a bulletproof case that even Brenda and her wealthy connections could not tear down. As I listened to Brenda rummaging through the kitchen downstairs, making herself a cup of tea, as if she had not just confessed to a horrific crime, my panic slowly hardened into an icy, unbreakable resolve. I looked back at the broken attic door. I silently promised the terrified girl inside that I was not abandoning her. I was just changing my strategy. I had barely taken a breath when the clinking of china abruptly stopped in the kitchen below. Heavy footsteps stomped back toward the stairs. Brenda was not finished with me. She marched back up the wooden steps, her face flushed with an ugly, arrogant anger. She realized I was still standing by the attic door, refusing to come downstairs and play the obedient, terrified victim. "What did I just tell you?" she snarled, reaching the landing and aggressively backing me into the wooden banister. "Do you think I am playing games with you, Diana?" She raised her hand and slammed it flat against the wall right next to my head, effectively trapping me in the narrow hallway. Her expensive perfume was suffocating. I felt my baby kick frantically against my ribs, reacting to my soaring heart rate. "You are going to walk down those stairs," Brenda ordered, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You are going to sit in the living room and you are going to smile. If you take one step toward that broken door, I will push you down these stairs myself and tell the paramedics you tripped in your hysterical state. Do you understand me?" Before I could formulate a response, the heavy front door swung open once again. The sound of confident, rhythmic footsteps echoed in the foyer, vastly different from Brenda's frantic stomping. "Take your hand off her right now, Brenda." The voice was sharp, commanding, and echoed with absolute authority. Brenda froze, her arms still pinning me against the wall. We both looked down the staircase. Standing in the foyer, radiating pure power in a tailored charcoal gray suit, was Jasmine. She is 34 years old, a brilliant corporate real estate attorney, and married to Bradley's younger brother, Derek. She is also a proud African-American woman who has spent her entire marriage tolerating Brenda's thinly veiled racism and relentless classist insults. But today, Jasmine was not playing the polite daughter-in-law. She looked up at us, her dark eyes flashing with a cold, calculated fury. "I said step away from her," Jasmine repeated, her voice cutting through the tense air like a perfectly sharpened blade. She began walking up the stairs, never breaking eye contact with Brenda. Brenda scoffed, slowly lowering her arm, but refusing to completely back away from me. "This is none of your business, Jasmine. Go back to whatever overpriced downtown law office you crawled out of. This is a private family matter involving my son and his wife. We do not need your kind interfering where you do not belong. Your kind, Jasmine repeated with a humorless, freezing laugh as she reached the top of the stairs. Do you mean a licensed officer of the court? Because from where I am standing, I just witnessed a classic textbook case of aggravated assault and unlawful imprisonment. Jasmine stepped smoothly between us, using her shoulder to physically break Brenda's cornering tactic, shielding me completely. She looked Brenda up and down with utter disgust. Let us review the penal code, Brenda. Jasmine continued, her tone crisp and professional. You just threatened physical violence against a pregnant woman. You forcefully grabbed her wrist earlier, leaving those bright red marks I can clearly see from here. That is felony assault in the state of Washington. I have my phone right here, and unlike Diana, you cannot physically overpower me to take it away. Would you like me to call the police, or would you prefer I call Derek and tell him his mother is attacking his pregnant sister-in-law? Brenda took a step back, her arrogant facade finally cracking under the weight of real legal consequences. She despised Jasmine. She had always hated that Derek married a strong, independent black woman instead of the submissive, wealthy country club girls she preferred. But Brenda also knew Jasmine was ruthless in a courtroom and never made an empty threat. You have absolutely no idea what is going on here. Brenda spat, her face twisting into a furious scowl. Diana is out of her mind. She is trying to ruin Bradley. Whatever lie you are spinning, I am not buying it, Jasmine replied smoothly, crossing her arms. Get out of this house, Brenda, right now. If you are not out the front door in 10 seconds, I will press charges on Diana's behalf, and I will personally make sure the arrest warrant is served while you are playing tennis at your ridiculous country club. Brenda stood trembling with rage. Her hands clenched into tight fists. She realized she had lost control of the immediate situation. She snatched her designer purse from the banister, glaring at me with eyes full of pure hatred. You think you won today? Diana? Brenda screamed, abandoning all pretense of her refined upper-class persona. You are nothing without my son. When Bradley gets home, he is going to divorce you. He is going to kick you out onto the street, drain every single bank account, and leave you absolutely penniless. You will not get a single dime of his money. You will be begging me for help when you are living in a shelter with that baby. With that final vicious threat, Brenda turned and stomped heavily down the stairs. We stood in silence, listening to the front door slam so hard, the glass panes rattled in their wooden frames. The sound of her luxury SUV tires screeching out of the driveway finally signaled that we were alone. I let out a long, shaky breath I did not realize I was holding and slumped against the wall, sliding down until I hit the hardwood floor. My whole body was trembling. Jasmine immediately dropped her imposing lawyer persona. She knelt down beside me, her expression softening into genuine concern as she placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? She asked softly, her eyes scanning my face. Did she actually hurt you? I shook my head, fighting back tears of sheer exhaustion. I am fine. But Jasmine, you do not understand. You need to see what is behind that door. Jasmine followed my gaze to the broken padlock resting on the floor, and then to the slightly ajar attic door. Her sharp legal mind was already racing, preparing for whatever nightmare Bradley had hidden in the dark. Jasmine walks past me, pushing the heavy wooden door wide open. I watch her tough, unshakable facade shatter for a fraction of a second when her eyes adjust to the dim light, and she sees Lily huddled on the filthy mattress. But Jasmine is a seasoned professional who deals with high-stakes crises every single day. She instantly shifts into problem-solving mode. We cannot leave her up here for another second, Jasmine states, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Grab her other side. Help me get her downstairs right now. Together, we carefully wrap Lily in a clean, soft blanket I grab from the hallway linen closet. Despite my heavy pregnancy and aching back, adrenaline gives me the strength to help support Lily's fragile weight. We slowly guide her down the wide oak staircase. We bypass the second floor completely and take her directly to the first floor guest suite. It is a beautiful room with its own attached bathroom, plush carpets, and a set of glass French doors that let in the warm, late afternoon sun. The sheer contrast between this luxurious air-conditioned room and the sweltering, toxic attic is absolutely sickening. We gently lay Lily on the expensive mattress. Jasmine immediately goes to the kitchen and returns with a large glass of ice water and a bowl of soft fruit. We sit by the edge of the bed, patiently coaxing Lily to take small sips of water until her breathing finally evens out and she closes her eyes exhausted, but finally safe. Once Lily is deeply asleep, Jasmine gestures for me to follow her into the massive, pristine kitchen. She walks over to the espresso machine and pours us both a cup of dark coffee. I lean heavily against the cool granite counter, looking at my sister-in-law with a profound new respect. "Thank you," I whisper, my voice cracking slightly. "I honestly do not know what I would have done if you had not walked through that front door today." Jasmine takes a slow sip of her coffee, her dark eyes hard and uncompromising. Brenda and Bradley have always operated under the arrogant delusion that they are completely untouchable, she says, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet, cavernous kitchen. "Do you know why Brenda hates me so intensely, Diana? It is not just because I am a strong black woman who refuses to play the subservient, quiet role in their little wealthy country club fantasy. That is certainly part of it, of course. I have endured her subtle microaggressions and her backhanded compliments about how articulate I am for years. But the real underlying reason they despise me is because of my money and my firm boundaries." I frown, confused by the sudden shift in conversation. Jasmine sets her mug down on the counter with a firm thud. "2 years ago, right before you announced you were pregnant, Bradley came to my downtown law firm. He was absolutely desperate. His tech startup was bleeding cash at an alarming rate, and his initial wealthy investors were threatening to pull their funding completely. He wanted me to secure a massive corporate loan using my firm's legal resources and my personal banking connections. When I looked closely at his financial records, they were a complete disaster. He was artificially inflating his user numbers and burning through crucial capital on ridiculous luxury expenses. I flat out refused to help him. I told him I would never risk my hard-earned law license or my personal money on his sinking ship. He threw a massive tantrum in my office, calling me an ungrateful outsider. Brenda backed him up, of course. She actually told my husband Derek that he should divorce me immediately for not supporting the family business." Jasmine reaches into her tailored suit pocket and pulls out a small, sleek silver flash drive. She sets it down on the granite counter between us. Its metal casing clinks softly against the polished stone. "But Derek is just like his mother." Jasmine continues, her tone turning bitter and cold. "He worships the ground Bradley walks on. Lately, Derek has been acting incredibly nervous, taking private phone calls outside and hiding his mail from me. Yesterday, a private courier dropped off a thick, sealed envelope at our house while Derek was at the gym. It had the discreet logo of a sketchy offshore holding company. As a seasoned real estate attorney, my professional instincts instantly kicked in. I opened it. What I found inside was so deeply disturbing that I copied all the digital files onto this drive and drove straight over here to warn you." I stare at the small silver drive, a cold, heavy knot forming in the pit of my stomach. "What is on it, Jasmine?" Jasmine looks me dead in the eye, all traces of sisterly comfort completely gone, replaced by the sharp, ruthless gaze of a corporate lawyer preparing for a brutal war. "Bradley did not just steal Lily's medical funds to keep his mistress happy," she says quietly, leaning closer to me. "He stole your entire future. I intercepted these documents this morning. You need to plug this in and look at the property deeds, Diana." I grabbed the flash drive from the granite counter with trembling fingers. Without saying another word, I walked straight to my home office down the hall, grabbed my heavy work laptop, and brought it back to the kitchen island. Jasmine stood silently beside me, her arms crossed tight against her chest, watching me work. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but the moment the bright blue screen of my computer illuminated the dark kitchen, my professional instincts completely took over. I was no longer just a terrified pregnant wife. I was a senior forensic financial auditor, and I was about to dissect my husband's entire life. I plugged the small silver drive into the USB port and opened the main folder. There were dozens of scanned PDF documents, heavily encrypted bank statements, and legal contracts. I clicked on the first file labeled Property Title and Deed Transfer. As my eyes quickly scanned the dense legal jargon, the breath was instantly knocked out of my lungs. It was a finalized contract for a massive second mortgage on our house. My house. When Bradley and I first got married, his tech startup was barely getting off the ground. I used the entirety of my own personal savings money I had meticulously invested since I was 22 years old to pay the massive down payment on this property. The house was supposed to be our safe haven. Now staring at the bright screen, I saw that Bradley had secretly leveraged every single ounce of equity in the property to take out a staggering $2.5 million loan. I scrolled down to the bottom of the 60-page document to find the signature line. There in stark black ink was my name, but I had never seen this document in my life. I zoomed in on the digital signature. The loop on the D and the sharp angle of the A were completely wrong. "This is a forgery," I whispered, my voice thick with absolute disbelief. "Jasmine, he forged my signature on federal bank documents. He mortgaged my house without my knowledge." Jasmine nodded grimly, leaning over my shoulder to point at the screen. "Keep looking, Diana. The mortgage fraud is just the beginning. Open the folder labeled Wire Transfers. You need to see exactly where that $2.5 million went." My hands flew across the keyboard. As an auditor, I spent 40 hours a week tracking hidden assets for massive corporations. Finding a missing $2 million was exactly what I did for a living. I opened the wire transfer receipts and immediately spotted the routing numbers. The massive loan did not go into his failing tech company business accounts to save his investors. It did not go into our joint checking account. Instead, the money was wired directly to an obscure shell corporation registered in Delaware. From there, I tracked the digital trail as it bounced through 2 different international intermediary banks before finally landing in a private offshore trust fund in the Cayman Islands. Bradley had meticulously washed the money to hide it from domestic tax authorities. I clicked on the trust incorporation documents Jasmine had somehow managed to intercept. My eyes darted to the section listing the primary beneficiary of the offshore account. I expected to see Bradley's name or maybe his mother Brenda's name, but the name printed in bold black letters made my stomach violently churn. Sienna, his 27-year-old executive assistant. The woman he was currently vacationing with in the Bahamas. I pushed the laptop away, the granite counter suddenly feeling like ice against my palms. He took out a $2.5 million loan against the house I bought, forged my signature, and gave the money to his mistress. The terrifying puzzle pieces rapidly snapped together in my mind. The $15,000 a month he stole from Lily's medical care was just to fund his daily luxury lifestyle and keep his failing startup artificially afloat on paper. The $2.5 million was his actual escape plan. He was actively preparing to bleed me dry, ruin my credit permanently, and run off with Sienna to live in luxury, leaving me to deal with the massive federal debt and a foreclosed home while pregnant. The sheer calculated cruelty of his plan was breathtaking. He had weaponized my love, my trust, and my financial stability against me. He and his mother thought I was just a naive, compliant wife who would cry, sign whatever divorce papers they shoved in my face, and walk away quietly into the night. They thought they had backed me into a completely inescapable corner. Jasmine placed a steady hand on my back. "The legal reality is brutal, Diana," she said softly. "If you just pack your bags and leave him today, you default on that massive fraudulent loan. The bank will seize this house. You will be legally tied to a $2.5 million debt, and Bradley will hire expensive lawyers to claim you signed those papers willingly. He will drag out the divorce until you are completely bankrupt, and then he will try to take full custody of your baby just to punish you. I stared blankly at the dark window of the kitchen, looking at my own reflection. I wiped a single tear from my cheek. I am not leaving, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. If I leave, I lose everything. I am going to stay right here, Jasmine. I am going to trap him. Jasmine pulled a sleek leather chair away from the kitchen island and sat down, leaning her elbows on the polished granite. Her dark eyes bore into mine, completely devoid of pity. I did not need pity right now. I needed strategy. Good, Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. Because crying will not win this war, Diana. Bradley and Brenda have spent their entire lives treating people like disposable chess pieces. They think because you are pregnant and naturally empathetic, you are weak. We are going to use their own toxic arrogance completely against them. We are going to build a legal trap so tight, so legally bulletproof, that by the time they realize they are caught, the federal authorities will already be knocking on their front door. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap. How do we do it? Where do we even start? He has the money, he has the connections, and he clearly has no moral compass. Jasmine opened her designer briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a silver pen. First, we secure the most vulnerable asset in this house, Lily. Tomorrow morning, before anyone else wakes up, I am calling a highly specialized private medical transport team. I know a discreet private pediatric physician who owes me a massive favor. We are going to have Lily thoroughly examined. The doctor will meticulously document every sign of malnourishment, every bruise, and every indicator of severe neglect. Once I have that ironclad medical report, I am filing an emergency ex parte guardianship petition with a judge I trust implicitly. We will legally strip Bradley of his guardianship over Lily before he even steps foot off his fancy island vacation. My heart leaped with a tiny spark of genuine hope. Can we actually do that without him knowing? Will the judge really sign it that quickly? When a severely disabled minor is facing imminent, life-threatening physical harm, the family court system moves with terrifying speed, Jasmine assured me, writing quickly on the yellow pad. The medical evidence will be undeniable. But here's the most crucial part of this plan, Diana. You cannot let Bradley know that you suspect anything about the money or the forged mortgage. You have to convince him that you are exactly the submissive, terrified little wife Brenda expects you to be. You have to make him feel completely powerful and entirely in control. I swallowed hard, the taste of bile still lingering in the back of my throat. So I have to play the fool. I have to smile at the man who is actively trying to destroy my life and act like nothing is wrong. Yes, Jasmine said firmly. You have to play the best role of your life. If he suspects for a single second that you have seen those offshore trust documents, he will instantly move the money again, destroy the remaining evidence, and flee the country with his mistress. We need him arrogant. We need him relaxed, because arrogant men make massive, careless mistakes. I took a deep breath, staring at the cold black screen of my laptop. I could do this. I was a professional auditor. My entire career was built on keeping a perfectly neutral poker face while secretly dissecting corporate lies. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I opened my text message thread with Bradley. His last message, sent just a few hours ago, was a sickeningly sweet picture of a Bahamian sunset with a caption about how much he missed his beautiful wife. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the digital keyboard. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream at him, to call him a monster, to tell him I knew everything about his sickening double life. But I remembered the terrified look in Lily's eyes. I remembered the forged signature on the $2 million debt. I forced my muscles to relax, pushed down the burning rage, and typed out my response. Bradley, I am so incredibly sorry. I was cleaning upstairs today and I had a terrible panic attack. Your mother came over and we had a misunderstanding. I know I have been hormonal and difficult lately. Please forgive me. I love you so much. I promise I will be better when you get home. Have a wonderful rest of your retreat. I hit send. It felt like swallowing a mouthful of shattered glass. Jasmine watched the text go through and nodded approvingly. Perfect. Now he thinks he has you completely handled. He will come home thinking he is the smartest man in the world. He will bring his mistress right into this house because he thinks you are too broken and submissive to ever question him. I looked at Jasmine, a cold, empty smile forming on my lips. Let him bring her. Let them both come into my house. I will cook them dinner myself. They are going to need a good meal before the federal agents drag them out in handcuffs. Jasmine smirked, tapping her silver pen against the granite counter. Now you are thinking like a lawyer, Diana. Let's get to work. We have a lot of financial tracking to do before his flight lands. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in calculated deception. True to her word, Jasmine arrived at the crack of dawn on Wednesday with a private unmarked medical transport van. We carefully moved Lily out of the house before the sun even fully crested the horizon. Jasmine had a trusted pediatric specialist waiting at a secure facility to document every horrifying detail of Lily's condition. The wheels of the emergency guardianship petition were already turning in family court, safely hidden behind sealed legal dockets. With Lily completely safe and the attic door quietly repaired to look exactly as it had before I scrubbed the house top to bottom and prepared for my husband's grand return. Bradley walked through the front door late Thursday afternoon, dragging an expensive leather suitcase behind him. He did not come alone. Following closely on his heels, dragging her own matching designer luggage, was Sienna. They both sported fresh glowing tans from the Bahamian sun. Bradley looked at me standing in the foyer, his face locked in a tight, condescending mask. He did not offer a hug or even a simple greeting after his supposedly grueling business retreat. I brought Sienna back with me for an emergency work session, Bradley announced smoothly, shrugging off his tailored suit jacket. The server crash at the office was worse than we thought. We have to crunch the quarterly numbers right here at the house to avoid a total disaster with the board of directors. I hope you are feeling more rational today, Diana. I really do not have the patience for another one of your hormonal outbursts. I dug my fingernails so deeply into the palms of my hands that they almost drew blood, but I forced my face to soften into an expression of profound apologetic guilt. I stepped forward and gently took his heavy jacket. I am so sorry about my behavior earlier this week, I said, keeping my voice small and incredibly meek. I know you are under a massive amount of stress. I just want to support you. Bradley smirked, a sickeningly triumphant look crossing his face. He exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Sienna. Sienna stood in the center of my marble foyer, looking around my expensive home with hungry, calculating eyes. She was already measuring the drapes. She wore a tight silk blouse and a gold necklace that I knew for a fact cost more than my first car. Good, Bradley replied dismissively, already turning his back on me. Sienna and I will be working in the downstairs study. We are going to need strong coffee. Bring us a fresh pot and some of those biscotti you bought. And please knock before you enter. We are dealing with highly sensitive corporate data. The sheer audacity of the command almost made me laugh out loud. He was ordering his pregnant wife to act as a maid for his mistress in the very house I had purchased with my own money. But I swallowed the burning pride in my throat and nodded obediently. Of course, sweetheart, I said softly. I will bring it right in. I went to the kitchen, brewed the coffee, and arranged a perfect tray. I brought it to the study, knocked politely, and served them with a practiced, oblivious smile. Sienna did not even look at me when she took her mug, treating me exactly like the hired help. I quietly left the room and went upstairs to wait. I knew Bradley's routine perfectly. After a long flight and a stressful work session, he always took a blistering hot 30-minute shower before dinner. An hour later, the study door opened. Sienna stayed downstairs taking a business call on the patio, while Bradley came upstairs to the master suite. I pretended to be asleep on the bed. He stripped off his clothes, tossed his phone onto the nightstand, and stepped into the master bathroom. The heavy glass shower door clicked shut, and the sound of running water filled the room. The second I heard the water hit the tiles, I shot up from the mattress. I grabbed his phone from the nightstand. Thanks to the security software I used at my auditing firm, I had brought a specialized data extraction cable home from my office. I plugged his phone directly into my waiting laptop. Bradley thought his 6-digit passcode made him untouchable, but he used the same predictable numeric combination for everything: our wedding anniversary and his birth year. I punched in the numbers. The phone unlocked instantly. My forensic software went to work rapidly, cloning his entire digital footprint in less than 4 minutes. I mirrored his authenticator apps, his encrypted messaging services, and most importantly, his secure offshore banking applications directly onto my secure hard drive. The progress bar hit 100% just as the water shut off in the bathroom. I smoothly unplugged the cable, placed his phone exactly where he had left it, and slipped back under the covers. When Bradley walked out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, I was exactly where he expected me to be. The quiet, unsuspecting wife. He had absolutely no idea that I now possessed the digital keys to his entire secret empire. I had total control over the $2.5 million he stole from me, and I was going to burn his life to the ground. The very next evening, Bradley decided to host a lavish dinner party to secure a new round of emergency funding. He told me he needed to impress 3 key venture capitalists who were flying in from San Francisco, and he demanded that I personally prepare a 5-course gourmet meal. He claimed hiring a professional catering company would look too impersonal and desperate to the investors. I knew the actual truth. He just wanted to save money because his domestic business accounts were running dangerously low, and he thoroughly enjoyed humiliating me in my own home. I spent the entire afternoon on my swollen feet, aching and exhausted, preparing butter-poached lobster bites, roasting a massive rack of lamb, and perfectly arranging artisan salads. Sienna arrived 2 full hours before the wealthy guests, completely ignoring me as I worked over the hot stove. She strutted into our formal dining room wearing a stunning backless crimson cocktail dress, loudly rearranging the expensive floral centerpieces I had spent an hour perfecting. When the venture capitalists finally arrived, Bradley introduced Sienna not just as his administrative assistant, but as his visionary co-founder and the head of strategic development. I stood quietly in the background near the kitchen archway wearing a plain, modest maternity dress. I held a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes like a hired servant, while my husband paraded his mistress around our living room, laughing at her jokes and touching her lower back when he thought no one was looking. Brenda swept into the house a few minutes later, dripping in her usual excessive gold jewelry and reeking of strong perfume. She immediately took over the role of the proud, wealthy matriarch, pouring expensive wine for the investors and loudly praising her brilliant son. Then Jasmine walked through the front door. She looked absolutely lethal in a sharply tailored emerald green pantsuit. She caught my eye across the crowded room and gave me a barely perceptible nod. The digital files and the offshore banking evidence were completely secure. Now it was time for the psychological warfare to begin. Jasmine completely bypassed the crowded bar and walked straight up to Brenda, who was standing near the grand stone fireplace, proudly watching Bradley and Sienna charm the investors. Jasmine held a glass of sparkling mineral water and smiled her most devastating, calculated corporate lawyer smile. She leaned in close to Brenda, her voice pitched perfectly to sound light and conversational, but loud enough for me to hear clearly from the kitchen. Bradley certainly seems to be taking wonderful care of his new strategic partner, Jasmine said smoothly, gesturing lightly towards Sienna with her glass. Brenda scoffed, her eyes narrowing with instant distaste. Sienna is just a temporary employee, Jasmine. Do not read into things. Bradley just needs a pretty face to help sell the software interface. Jasmine let out a soft, knowing laugh that dripped with condescension. An employee? Wow. Bradley must be paying his administrative staff incredibly well these days. Or perhaps his startup is far more profitable than he claims to the family. Tell me, Brenda, did you personally approve the corporate budget for that watch she is wearing tonight? Brenda frowned deeply, her sharp gaze snapping directly towards Sienna's wrist. Sienna was currently holding a wine glass, gesturing animatedly, displaying a glittering gold timepiece under the bright crystal chandelier. "What on earth are you talking about?" Brenda snapped, her voice losing its refined edge. Jasmine took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. "That is a solid rose gold Cartier Panther watch with a custom factory diamond bezel. I have the exact same luxury model saved on my personal wish list. It retails for just over $40,000 after taxes. It is a very generous bonus for someone who just files paperwork and fetches coffee, do you not think?" I watched from the kitchen as all the color drained completely out of Brenda's heavily powdered face. Her jaw tightened so hard, I genuinely thought her teeth might crack under the pressure. Brenda had actively helped Bradley lock his disabled teenage sister in a boiling attic under the strict absolute justification that every single penny of her medical funds was desperately needed to keep the tech company afloat. Brenda thought she was committing a necessary evil for the sake of preserving the family business empire. She had absolutely no idea that Bradley was taking that stolen money and dripping it in diamonds over a 27-year-old girl. Brenda glared at Sienna with a sudden, venomous hatred that radiated across the room. The carefully constructed toxic alliance between the mother and the son was officially cracked. Jasmine gave me a quick, triumphant look before politely excusing herself to mingle with the venture capitalists. I turned back to the kitchen to check on the roasting lamb, a genuine cold smile finally touching my lips. They were going to tear each other to pieces before I even had to lift a single finger. The dinner party finally ended just past midnight. The venture capitalists left in a fleet of black town cars, shaking Bradley's hand and seemingly satisfied with the expensive charade. Brenda stormed out shortly after, refusing to even look at Sienna. Her mind was clearly spinning with aggressive paranoia about the stolen money and the $40,000 watch. Bradley eventually walked Sienna to her car, lingering in the driveway for a deeply inappropriate amount of time. I stayed in the kitchen, silently loading the dishwasher, scrubbing the expensive china I had paid for with my own hard-earned money. The house felt unnervingly quiet, but the air was thick with an impending storm. I knew Bradley was furious. The subtle, icy tension between his mother and his mistress had humiliated him in front of the investors, and he always needed a vulnerable target to punish whenever he felt a sudden loss of absolute control. I heard the heavy front door click shut, followed by the sharp sound of the deadbolt locking into place. His heavy footsteps echoed loudly on the hardwood floor of the foyer, moving deliberately toward the kitchen. I kept my back to him, aggressively scrubbing a heavy roasting pan. Suddenly, his hand slammed down violently on the granite counter right next to me. I jumped, dropping the soapy sponge into the sink. Bradley stepped perfectly into my personal space, physically trapping me between his solid frame and the cold edge of the stainless steel sink. His face was flushed with alcohol and pure, unadulterated anger. His charming, sophisticated CEO persona had completely vanished, leaving behind the cold, calculating narcissist I now truly knew him to be. "What exactly did you say to my mother?" He hissed, his breath reeking of expensive scotch and mints. I stared at him intentionally, keeping my eyes wide and fearful. "Nothing," I stammered, shrinking back against the counter. "I was in the kitchen all night. I just cooked the dinner exactly like you asked me to." He slammed his fist against the counter again, making the delicate crystal wine glasses rattle ominously on the drying rack. "Do not lie to me, Diana. My mother was glaring at Sienna all evening like she wanted to kill her. You set Jasmine up to humiliate us. You are actively trying to sabotage my company because you are a jealous, pathetic woman who cannot handle my success." I shook my head, letting genuine tears of pure stress prick the corners of my eyes. "Bradley, please, I do not know what you are talking about. You are scaring me." He leaned in closer, his dark eyes wide and unblinking, his voice dropping to a terrifying, steady whisper. "This is exactly what I am talking about. This hysterical, paranoid behavior. You are losing your grip on reality, Diana. It is the pregnancy hormones. They are completely rotting your brain. You are turning out exactly like your mother. You know, everyone always said she was absolutely crazy before she died. I guess severe mental illness just runs deep in your defective bloodline. The cruel, unexpected mention of my late mother felt like a physical slap across the face, but I forced myself to swallow the burning rage. I played my part perfectly. I let out a loud, pathetic sob, covering my face with my soapy, trembling hands. "Please stop," I cried, letting my shoulders shake. He grabbed my wrists and violently pulled my hands away from my face, his grip bruising and tight. "Listen to me very carefully," he ordered. "If you ever try to humiliate me in front of my investors or my family again, I will call the hospital. I have already spoken to a private psychiatrist who owes me a favor. I will tell them you are a severe danger to yourself and our unborn child. I will have you institutionalized, Diana. I will lock you in a psychiatric ward. I will take full legal custody of the baby the second it is born, and you will never step foot in this house again. Do you understand me?" I nodded frantically, letting my body tremble violently in his aggressive grip. "Yes," I whispered, staring at the floor in total defeat. "I understand. I am so sorry." He let go of my wrists with a look of utter disgust, wiped his hands on a clean kitchen towel, and walked out of the room without another word. I listened to his heavy footsteps retreat upstairs to the master bedroom. I stayed frozen against the sink for a full minute, making absolutely sure he was completely gone. Then I slowly reached up and touched the stiff fabric of my maternity blouse collar. Hidden perfectly within the thick seam of the fabric was a micro-recording device Jasmine had securely taped there right before the dinner party started. It was military-grade, completely undetectable, and currently flashing a microscopic blue light. Every single cruel word, every sickening gaslighting attempt, and the explicit admission of his plan to falsely institutionalize me had been captured with crystal-clear audio. Better yet, the device was actively synced to my phone, uploading the audio file directly to Jasmine's secure law firm cloud server in real time. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, my heart beating with cold, relentless determination. Bradley thought he had just terrified me into permanent submission. He had absolutely no idea he had just handed me the exact felony blackmail evidence I needed to destroy him. The next morning, Bradley woke up and put on his tailored suit, as if he had not just threatened to lock his pregnant wife in a psychiatric ward. He drank the coffee I poured him, kissed my cheek with cold, unfeeling lips, and drove off to his corporate office. The absolute second his luxury sedan disappeared down the street, I rushed straight to my home office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I opened my secure laptop and pulled up the cloned files I had extracted from his phone. I had the terrifying audio recording safely synced to the law firm servers, but I needed far more than just a verbal threat to put him away for good. I needed the final, undeniable nail in his financial coffin. I opened the high-resolution PDF scans of the $2.5 million second mortgage document. I had been so utterly shocked by the forged signature the first time I looked at it that I had completely missed the finer administrative details. As a seasoned forensic auditor, I knew that the devil was always hiding in the smallest print. I scrolled rapidly past the complex loan terms and interest rates, heading straight to the very last page of the massive contract. This was the legally binding notarization section, the critical part where a sworn state official had to physically verify the identity of the person signing the document. I zoomed in heavily on the circular black ink stamp pressed firmly next to my fake signature. I squinted at the bright screen, reading the official name registered with the state of Washington. My heart did a sudden violent leap against my ribs. The registered notary public was not some random corrupt bank teller. The name clearly printed on the official state seal was Sienna, his 27-year-old mistress. She had used her official notary commission, a license granted by the state government, to legally swear she had checked my identification and watched me sign that document in person. I immediately grabbed my cell phone and called Jasmine. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert. I told her exactly what I had just found on the final page of the mortgage contract. For a brief moment, there was complete stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Jasmine let out a sharp, triumphant laugh that echoed loudly through the phone speaker. "Diana, Do you have any idea what she has just done? Jasmine asked, her voice vibrating with pure legal adrenaline. Sienna did not just help him cheat on you, she actively committed notary fraud on a multi-million-dollar real estate loan. That is a massive federal felony. Because the loan was processed through an FDIC-insured banking institution, her fake stamp instantly elevates this from a simple state-level forgery to severe federal bank fraud. If we hand this specific document over to the authorities right now, Sienna will be facing serious hard time in a federal penitentiary. A profound wave of satisfaction washed over me. The arrogant girl who had strutted around my dining room in a crimson dress, drinking my expensive wine and treating me like the hired help, had stupidly handed me the exact weapon I needed to completely destroy her life. I wanted to call the police right that very second. I wanted to watch them drag her out of Bradley's fancy corporate office in handcuffs. But Jasmine quickly grounded me, bringing my sharp focus back to the bigger picture. We cannot pull the trigger just yet. Jasmine warned me firmly, her tone shifting back to the ruthless corporate lawyer. Think about how incredibly slippery Bradley is. If we bust Sienna right now, he will instantly throw her right under the bus. He will hire the most expensive defense attorneys in Seattle and claim he had absolutely no idea she forged the documents. He will say his rogue obsessed assistant embezzled the $2.5 million entirely on her own to impress him. He will play the innocent victim, and he might actually get away with it. Jasmine was completely right. I could not let him use Sienna as a convenient legal scapegoat. I needed Bradley to definitively and explicitly tie himself to the stolen funds. I needed him to reach into that offshore Cayman Islands trust account and move the dirty money himself. Once his digital fingerprints were on that specific international transaction, his high-priced lawyers would never be able to untangle him from the criminal conspiracy. I stared at the forged signature on my screen, formulating my next aggressive move. I had to create a sudden, massive financial crisis for his tech startup. I had to squeeze his domestic account so incredibly hard that he would panic and desperately transfer the stolen money back to the United States to save his own ego. It was time to introduce my husband to the absolute worst nightmare of any corrupt corporate executive. I knew exactly how the federal financial regulatory system operated. It was a massive bureaucratic machine that usually moved at a frustratingly slow pace. But as a senior auditor, I also knew the exact trigger words and specific tax code violations required to bypass the lower-level analysts and push a file directly to the Emergency Enforcement Division. I opened a highly encrypted, untraceable web browser on my laptop and navigated to the official whistleblower portals for the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I did not upload the stolen offshore trust documents or the forged mortgage contract. That would give the government the entire case before I had the chance to trap Bradley personally. Instead, I carefully scattered a trail of undeniable digital breadcrumbs. I submitted anonymous, highly technical reports detailing massive discrepancies in his tech startup's quarterly tax filings. I highlighted a pattern of suspicious, undocumented capital outflows and provided the exact routing numbers for the first two international intermediary banks he used to wash the stolen medical funds. I flagged the corporate accounts for suspected high-level embezzlement and systemic investor fraud. Because I submitted the complaints using the encrypted portal tied to my specialized professional credentials, the algorithms automatically flagged the reports as high-priority, credible insider intelligence. I hit submit on both government websites, closed my laptop, and quietly went downstairs to make myself a cup of herbal tea. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the jaws to snap shut. The federal government took exactly 48 hours to act. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning. Bradley was standing in our expansive kitchen, dressed in a sharp navy blue Italian suit, projecting the image of a completely untouchable billionaire. He was loudly barking orders at Sienna over the phone, complaining about the catering options for an upcoming corporate retreat. I was sitting at the kitchen island, quietly eating a bowl of oatmeal, playing the role of the docile, invisible pregnant wife. Bradley hung up the phone with an irritated sigh and grabbed his sleek black titanium corporate credit card from his wallet. He opened his laptop on the granite counter to quickly pay the $50,000 deposit for the luxury retreat venue. I watched him from the corner of my eye, my spoon pausing halfway to my mouth. He confidently typed in the credit card details, his expensive watch catching the morning light, and aggressively hit the submit payment button. A bright red error message immediately flashed across his screen. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution. Bradley frowned, a look of profound annoyance crossing his handsome features. He muttered a sharp curse under his breath, assuming it was a simple fraud alert block. He picked up his cell phone and dialed the elite customer service line reserved for high-net-worth clients. He put the phone on speaker and tossed it onto the counter, expecting the issue to be resolved in seconds. "Good morning, Mr. CEO," a polite customer service representative answered. "How can I assist you today? My corporate black card was just declined for a routine venue deposit." Bradley stated, his tone dripping with condescension. "I need you to lift the security block immediately. I do not have time to deal with administrative errors today." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. The sound of rapid typing echoed through the speaker. When the representative finally spoke again, her polite, scripted tone was completely gone, replaced by a cold, formal legal cadence. "Sir, I am looking at your corporate accounts now. There is no standard security block on your card. Your entire financial portfolio, including your primary business checking, payroll accounts, and corporate credit lines, has been completely frozen." "Frozen!" Bradley yelled, slamming his hands down on the granite counter so hard my oatmeal bowl rattled. "What are you talking about? I have over $4 million in operational liquidity in those accounts. Unfreeze them right this second, or I am pulling all of my business from your bank." "I am extremely sorry, sir, but we do not have the authorization to lift this restriction," the representative replied, sounding slightly nervous but firm. "The freeze was not initiated by our internal fraud department. It is a direct mandate from the federal government. Your accounts have been locked pending an immediate comprehensive audit by the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission. You will need to contact federal authorities to resolve this matter." The representative abruptly ended the call. The kitchen fell into a deafening, terrifying silence. Bradley stood frozen, staring blankly at the red error message on his laptop screen. All the arrogant color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very small. He frantically logged into his mobile banking app. Every single account balance showed a terrifying zero marked with a bright red legal lock icon. His tech startup was dead in the water. He could not pay his vendors. He could not pay his employees. He could not even buy a cup of coffee. I lowered my eyes to my breakfast, hiding the massive, triumphant smile spreading across my face. He was completely cut off from his domestic money. The only cash he had left in the entire world was the $2.5 million sitting in Sienna's offshore Cayman account. And to get it, he was going to have to commit a desperate, traceable federal crime. Bradley slammed his laptop completely shut, the sharp crack echoing in the silent kitchen like a gunshot. He grabbed his expensive cell phone from the granite counter and hurled it furiously against the stainless steel refrigerator. The device shattered instantly, pieces of glass and metal raining down onto the pristine hardwood floor. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored suit, his eyes wide with a wild, unfiltered panic. Sienna, who had just walked into the kitchen, holding a stack of corporate brochures, froze in her tracks. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the shattered phone on the floor. "Get the chief financial officer on the line right now," Bradley roared, his face turning an ugly shade of crimson. "Use your phone. The federal government just froze every single account. We have zero operating liquidity. Call the accounting department and tell them to figure out who flagged our tax filings before I fire every single one of them." Sienna scrambled to pull her phone out of her designer purse, her manicured fingers shaking so badly she dropped it twice. She dialed the numbers, pressing the phone tightly to her ear, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. The financial department at his tech startup was already abandoning ship, likely terrified of the sudden federal audit. "They are not answering," Sienna whispered, taking a cautious step backward. "Bradley, what do we do? The venue needs the deposit today or we lose the booking." Bradley ran his hands aggressively through his perfectly styled hair, completely ruining the sleek look. "It is those incompetent fools in accounting," he yelled, pacing back and forth across the kitchen like a caged animal. "Someone made a massive clerical error on the quarterly reports. They triggered an automated audit. I am going to sue the entire department for gross negligence." I quietly picked up my bowl of oatmeal and my mug of herbal tea. I slipped out of the kitchen, giving them a wide berth, and walked into the adjacent living room. I sat down heavily on the plush velvet sofa, resting my hands comfortably on my pregnant belly. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my warm tea. The chamomile tasted absolutely wonderful. The screaming in the kitchen continued to escalate. Bradley was tearing through the cabinets, frantically searching for an emergency burner phone he kept hidden for international business calls. Sienna was pacing the floor, her high heels clicking rapidly, her voice rising in pitch as the reality of the situation finally set in. Without that domestic money, her lavish shopping sprees and luxury vacations were instantly over. Then the heavy mahogany front door burst open without a single warning knock. Brenda marched into the foyer, moving with the terrifying momentum of a freight train. She had clearly received a frantic call from one of her wealthy country club friends who sat on the board of Bradley's primary domestic bank. News of a sudden, massive federal freeze traveled incredibly fast in our affluent, gossip-hungry social circles. Brenda did not even look at me sitting quietly in the living room. She marched straight into the kitchen, her eyes locked entirely on Sienna. All of the boiling paranoia Jasmine had expertly planted the night before finally exploded. "You filthy little thief!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unhinged rage. Before Bradley could even turn around, Brenda lunged directly at Sienna. She grabbed the younger woman by the shoulder of her expensive silk blouse and violently yanked her backward. Sienna let out a piercing scream, dropping her phone as she stumbled awkwardly on her high heels. Brenda did not stop there. She reached out and aggressively grabbed Sienna's left wrist, her manicured nails digging deep into the skin right next to the glittering $40,000 Cartier watch. "I knew it," Brenda screamed directly into Sienna's terrified face. "I knew you were stealing from him. You embezzled the corporate funds, you drained my son's accounts to buy your ridiculous jewelry, and now the federal government is coming after our family. Get your hands off me, you crazy old woman." Sienna shrieked violently, twisting her arm to break Brenda's vicious grip. "I did not take anything. He bought this watch for me." The confession slipped out of Sienna's mouth before she could stop it. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolutely devastating. Brenda froze, her eyes darting from the diamond watch to her son's pale face. Bradley stood frozen near the kitchen island, his mouth opening and closing as he desperately tried to formulate a lie. "He bought it for you," Brenda whispered, the horrifying realization finally sinking in. "You told me the medical funds were strictly for the business, Bradley. You told me Lily had to suffer so the company could survive, and you bought her diamonds." "Mom, listen to me." Bradley started holding his hands up defensively. "It is a complicated corporate expense." Brenda let out a guttural scream of absolute fury and launched herself at her son, slapping him hard across the face. Sienna used the distraction to grab her purse and sprint toward the front door, sobbing hysterically. Bradley grabbed his mother by the shoulders, shouting at her to calm down, while Brenda violently thrashed and cursed him for ruining their pristine family legacy. I sat comfortably on the velvet sofa, crossing my ankles and taking another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my tea. The living room was bathed in warm morning sunlight. In the kitchen, the powerful tech CEO and his ruthless aristocratic mother were physically tearing each other apart over the lies they had built together. The incredibly tight, toxic alliance that had terrorized me for 5 years was officially broken. And the absolute best part was that I had not raised my voice once. I was just watching the spectacular fiery collapse from the front row. The screaming match in the kitchen finally ended when Brenda stormed out, threatening to completely cut Bradley out of the family trust. Sienna had already fled out the front door, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and panicked tears. Bradley was left standing alone in the center of the shattered kitchen, staring at the broken glass of his cell phone on the floor. I remained on the velvet sofa, perfectly still, watching him mentally calculate his rapidly shrinking options. He was a cornered predator, completely cut off from his company funds, his mother's wealth, and his mistress. He only had one major domestic asset left to exploit: my house. It took him exactly 6 hours to formulate his final, desperate exit strategy. Later that evening, while I was sitting in the dimly lit living room, folding a small stack of baby clothes, Bradley walked in. He was no longer in a panicked rage. He wore a cold, dead expression, holding a thick stack of crisp legal documents bound by a heavy black clip. He did not say a word as he approached the coffee table. He simply dropped the heavy stack of papers right on top of the tiny baby onesies I had just folded. The loud thud made me flinch intentionally. "These are divorce papers," Bradley stated, his voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "I had my lawyers draft them this afternoon. Our marriage is over, Diana. Your paranoid behavior and emotional instability have become a massive liability to my career and my mental health." I stared at the thick stack of papers, forcing my hands to tremble as I reached out to touch the top page. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, letting my voice crack with perfectly practiced devastation. "Bradley, please, we are having a baby. You cannot just throw us away," he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "I am not throwing you away. I am making a practical business decision. My company is undergoing a massive federal restructuring and I need absolute liquidity. I am selling this house immediately. Since your name is on the deed, you are going to sign a full quitclaim transferring all of your property rights completely over to me so I can expedite the sale." He tapped the thick stack of papers with his index finger. "And since we are married, all of our debts are shared. You are going to legally accept 50% responsibility for the $2.5 million second mortgage on this property. You signed the loan documents, Diana. You are legally bound to it." The sheer breathtaking audacity of his lie almost made me break character. He was actually trying to gaslight me into believing I had willingly signed the forged mortgage contract. He wanted to liquidate the house, pocket whatever cash was left after the bank took their initial cut, and leave me drowning in over $1 million of fraudulent federal debt. He was trying to financially bury me alive so he could run away clean. "I cannot pay that kind of money," I cried, letting tears spill freely down my cheeks. "Bradley, that will completely bankrupt me. I will have nothing left for the baby." Bradley leaned down, placing both hands flat on the coffee table, bringing his cold face inches from mine. "That is the exact leverage I am offering you, Diana. If you fight me on this, I will drag you through the family court system for years. I will use my expensive lawyers to prove you are mentally unstable. I will take full legal custody of our child, and I will leave you rotting on the street. But if you sign these papers exactly as they are written, taking the massive debt and giving me the house, I will walk away. I will let you keep the baby. I will not even ask for visitation. You get your child, and I get my absolute freedom." I collapsed back against the sofa cushions, burying my face in my hands, sobbing loudly. Inside, my heart was soaring. He had just handed me the physical proof of his extortion attempt. He had officially put his criminal intentions on paper, clearly documenting his attempt to coerce a pregnant woman into taking a fraudulent multi-million-dollar debt. "Please," I sobbed, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, Bradley. I just need a little bit of time to read through this. My whole life is falling apart. Please just give me 1 week to process the fact that my marriage is actually over." Bradley rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by my emotional display, but he sensed he had already won. He thought I was completely broken. "Fine," he snapped, straightening his posture and adjusting his expensive cuffs. "You have exactly 1 week. Thanksgiving is next Thursday. We are having the traditional family dinner right here in this house. You will sit at that table, you will smile at my mother, and when the dinner is over, you will sign every single page of those documents in front of everyone. If you refuse, I am calling my lawyers on Friday morning and taking the baby." I nodded weakly, wiping my tear-stained cheeks. "Okay," I whispered. "I promise. I will sign them at Thanksgiving dinner." Bradley turned on his heel and walked out of the living room, heading up the stairs to pack an overnight bag. He was likely going to stay at a luxury hotel, putting the massive bill on whatever credit line he had left. I sat alone in the quiet living room, looking down at the divorce papers resting on my baby's clothes. My tears stopped instantly. My hands were perfectly steady. I had promised him a signature at Thanksgiving dinner, and I was going to deliver exactly what I promised. It was just going to be on a very different set of federal documents. Early Wednesday morning, just one day before the Thanksgiving deadline, I drove to Jasmine's downtown law firm. I carried a sleek leather folder containing copies of every single piece of evidence we had gathered over the past few days. The fake mortgage, the wire transfers, the audio recordings, and now Bradley's extortionate divorce demand. But our primary focus that morning was not the money or the impending corporate collapse. It was Lily. Jasmine was waiting for me in her expansive corner office overlooking the Seattle skyline. Spread across her large mahogany desk were the official medical reports from the pediatric specialist who had thoroughly examined Lily at the secure facility. The clinical findings were absolutely devastating. I sat in a heavy leather chair across from Jasmine as she read the medical details aloud. Lily was severely malnourished, chronically dehydrated, and suffering from early-stage muscle atrophy due to prolonged confinement in that sweltering attic. The doctor explicitly noted that if she had been left up there for another month, her internal organs would have begun shutting down completely. "We have everything we need," Jasmine said, her voice dropping into that cold, uncompromising professional register she always used when she was preparing for war. "I am heading to the county courthouse in 30 minutes for an emergency ex parte hearing. Because of the immediate life-threatening danger to a dependent minor, the judge will hear this case behind closed doors without Bradley or his high-priced corporate lawyers present." I nodded, feeling a tight knot of anxious anticipation in my stomach. "Are you absolutely sure this will work? Bradley has spent years building a bulletproof public image in this city. He donates heavily to political campaigns. He sits on the boards of local charities. What if the judge refuses to believe a wealthy, respected tech executive could do something this horrific to his own sister?" Jasmine gave me a sharp, confident smile as she gathered the thick stacks of medical papers into her designer briefcase. "A polished public image does not mean a single thing when I have hard medical evidence and date-stamped photographs of an attic prison. Do not worry about the judge, Diana. He is an old colleague of mine, and he has absolutely zero tolerance for wealthy hypocrites who abuse disabled children. You just go home, act normal, and prepare that Thanksgiving turkey. I will call you the absolute second I walk out of the courtroom." I left the law firm and drove back to my empty house. Bradley was still staying at his luxury hotel downtown, blissfully unaware that the foundation of his entire life was actively crumbling beneath his feet. I spent the afternoon mechanically prepping for the holiday dinner, chopping vegetables and mixing stuffing, but my mind was miles away at the courthouse. Every single time my cell phone buzzed, my heart jumped violently into my throat. Finally, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Jasmine. I answered immediately, dropping my kitchen knife onto the cutting board. "Tell me it is done," I said, gripping the cold edge of the granite counter. I could hear the distinct echo of the marble courthouse hallway in the background as Jasmine spoke. "It is done, Diana." The judge took exactly one look at the medical reports and the photos of that filthy mattress, and he was absolutely appalled. He immediately stripped Bradley of all medical and legal guardianship rights over Lily. "The court has officially granted full temporary custody jointly to you and me. She is permanently safe. Bradley cannot touch her, he cannot move her, and he cannot access a single penny of whatever money is left in her trust fund." A massive wave of profound relief washed over me. I leaned heavily against the counter, closing my eyes as tears of genuine joy finally slipped out. Thank God, I whispered. Where is the legal paperwork? Will Bradley be notified today? That is the absolute best part, Jasmine replied, her tone dripping with dark, vengeful satisfaction. Because Bradley is deemed an immediate flight risk due to the active federal financial freeze on his company, the judge has placed the guardianship transfer under a strict legal seal until tomorrow evening. Bradley will have absolutely no idea he has lost control of his sister until we tell him to his face. And the judge did not stop there, Diana. My eyes snapped open. What else did he do? Jasmine took a deep breath, savoring the massive legal victory. Based on the overwhelming evidence of intentional starvation and physical neglect, the judge bypassed the standard police investigation phase entirely. He went straight to the district attorney. The court has officially issued a sealed felony arrest warrant for Bradley for severe dependent abuse and unlawful imprisonment. The warrant is active right now. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the sheer magnitude of her words echoing in my mind. A sealed felony arrest warrant. Bradley was no longer just a cheating husband or a desperate corporate fraudster facing an IRS audit. He was an active wanted fugitive in the eyes of the law, and he did not even know it yet. He was planning to walk into my dining room tomorrow to bully me into signing a fraudulent divorce settlement. He truly thought he held all the winning cards. I will call my contacts at the local precinct and coordinate with the federal agents who are already investigating his bank fraud. Jasmine continued smoothly. We are going to wrap all of his massive crimes into one undeniable package. Have the dining room table set for 6 p.m. tomorrow, Diana. The police have agreed to execute the arrest warrant exactly when we give the signal. I hung up the phone and looked around my beautiful kitchen. Everything was perfectly in its place. The trap was fully constructed, the legal warrants were signed, and the jaws were locked wide open. All I had to do now was survive the next 24 hours and wait for my arrogant husband to walk blindly into his own spectacular demise. Later that same Wednesday evening, just hours after Jasmine confirmed the sealed arrest warrant, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the quiet house. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked to the foyer. When I pulled the door open, I did not find my husband. Instead, Sienna stood on the porch flanked by 3 massive, incredibly expensive designer suitcases. She wore a smug, victorious smile, her crimson lipstick perfectly applied. Without waiting for an invitation, she grabbed the handles of her luggage and pushed right past me into the house. Her high heels clicked loudly on the hardwood floor as she made her way directly toward the grand staircase. Bradley told me you finally came to your senses and agreed to the divorce terms, Sienna said over her shoulder, not even bothering to look at me. He is staying at the hotel for one more night to finalize some corporate restructuring paperwork, but he wanted me to get settled in before the family dinner tomorrow. I am moving my things into the master suite. You can sleep in the guest room until the house sells. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her actions would have completely destroyed me just a few days ago. I would have screamed, cried, and physically blocked her from climbing those stairs. But now, knowing that a federal judge had already signed the documents that would lock her in a prison cell, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical amusement. I quietly closed the front door and followed her up to the second floor. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom and watched as Sienna aggressively took over my personal space. She opened her heavy suitcases and began pulling out sheer silk robes, expensive lingerie, and designer dresses. She carelessly tossed my carefully arranged maternity pillows off the bed, letting them fall onto the floor. She swept my expensive face creams off the marble bathroom vanity to make room for her own overflowing makeup bags. She was actively erasing my existence from the room, acting like she was the new queen of a massive corporate castle. You know, Diana, you really only have yourself to blame for all of this, Sienna said, pausing to admire her reflection in the full-length mirror. She turned to face me, placing her hands on her hips. You are just a pathetic, boring wife. Bradley is a visionary. He needs a woman who understands high-level business, someone who can actually keep up with his drive and ambition. You just wanted to sit around, bake cookies, and be pregnant. You suffocated him. I leaned casually against the wooden doorframe, resting my hands comfortably on my stomach. She actually believed her own delusional narrative. Bradley had clearly spun a massive web of lies after his accounts were frozen that morning. He likely convinced her that the federal audit was just a minor clerical error, and that selling my house would instantly free up millions of dollars for them to escape to a tropical island. She had absolutely no idea that she was moving her designer clothes into a house that I solely owned, preparing to marry a man who was over $5 million in debt and actively being hunted by the federal government. You are getting everything you deserve. Sienna continued, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. Tomorrow night you are going to sign those divorce papers, take the debt you owe and get out of our lives. Bradley and I are going to take the cash from this house, move to a private villa in the Caribbean, and rebuild the company without you dragging us down. You lost Diana. It is time to accept reality. I looked at her standing there in her expensive clothes, completely blind to the spectacular trap closing rapidly around her. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply smiled, a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile that made her victorious expression falter for a fraction of a second. You are absolutely right, Sienna. I said, my voice soft and perfectly steady. I am going to sign documents tomorrow night, but since you are so heavily involved in Bradley's high-level business transactions, I highly suggest you make sure you practice your signature tonight. You are going to need it very soon. Sienna frowned, clearly confused by my calm demeanor and the cryptic warning. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to decipher my words. What are you talking about? She snapped defensively. I just shrugged, turning my back on her and the master bedroom I had shared with my husband for 5 years. Just a piece of friendly advice for a fellow businesswoman, I replied over my shoulder. Sleep well, Sienna. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. I walked down the hall to the guest room, leaving her standing alone in the master suite. She scoffed loudly, slamming the bedroom door shut to prove her dominance. She brushed off my warning as the senseless rambling of a broken, defeated woman. She had absolutely no idea that I was referring to the federal confession papers she would be forced to sign when the FBI raided our Thanksgiving dinner in less than 24 hours. The board was set. The pieces were locked in place. The game was over. Thursday arrived with a bitter chill in the autumn air, but inside the house the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. I spent the entire morning and early afternoon mechanically preparing the elaborate holiday meal. I roasted the massive turkey, prepared the garlic mashed potatoes, and set the long dining room table with my absolute best crystal glasses and fine china. Every plate was perfectly aligned, every linen napkin meticulously folded. It looked like the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine, a pristine, perfect facade hiding the absolute rot underneath. Sienna came downstairs just before 5 o'clock wearing a deeply inappropriate skin-tight emerald cocktail dress. She immediately tried to play the role of the gracious host, attempting to rearrange the floral centerpiece I had already perfected. I simply ignored her, retreating to the kitchen to check on the side dishes. Shortly after, the heavy front door opened, and Brenda walked in. She looked completely exhausted, her face tight and pale beneath her heavy makeup. She did not offer a greeting to anyone. She marched straight into the dining room, her eyes locking instantly onto Sienna's wrist. The $40,000 Cartier watch was still there, glittering under the chandelier. Brenda gripped her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white, but she forced herself to sit down at the table without saying a word. She was clearly banking on Bradley selling my house to fix the massive federal freeze on his company. Finally, Jasmine arrived. She walked through the front door looking absolutely radiant and terrifyingly sharp in a tailored burgundy pantsuit. She caught my eye as I brought the final gravy boat to the table. She gave me a single, subtle nod. The police were positioned exactly where they needed to be. The trap was fully armed and waiting for my signal. We all sat down at the beautiful table. The seating arrangement was a hostile, aggressive display of power. Bradley sat at the head of the long wooden table. Sienna sat directly to his right, occupying the chair that had always belonged to me for the past 5 years. Brenda sat to his left, glaring daggers across the turkey at the mistress. I was banished to the complete opposite end of the table, furthest away from my own husband. Jasmine sat quietly to my right, sipping a glass of sparkling water, projecting an aura of total, unshakable calm. The meal began in deafening, agonizing silence. The only sounds in the massive dining room were the clinking of expensive silver forks against porcelain plates and the tense, heavy breathing of my mother-in-law. Bradley poured himself a generous glass of expensive red wine, drinking it far too quickly. He was clearly riding a massive wave of false adrenaline. He genuinely believed his master plan was about to be executed flawlessly. He thought he was minutes away from securing absolute financial freedom. Halfway through the excruciating meal, Bradley abruptly pushed his half-eaten plate away. He wiped his mouth with a crisp linen napkin, cleared his throat loudly to command the room's attention, and reached inside his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out the thick, heavy stack of legal divorce papers he had shown me the night before. Without breaking eye contact with me, Bradley tossed the documents onto the polished mahogany wood. With a smug, intensely arrogant smile, he pushed the heavy stack right past the massive roasted turkey, sliding it all the way down the table until it stopped directly in front of my plate. He casually pulled a sleek silver pen from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the top page. It landed with a sharp, metallic clack. "Let us get this unpleasant business out of the way," Bradley announced, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "I have a lot to be thankful for this year, but primarily, I am thankful for absolute clarity." He leaned back in his chair, draping one arm casually over the back of Sienna's seat in a disgusting show of solidarity. He looked down the length of the table at me, his eyes filled with pure, unfiltered condescension. "Some people just are not built for high-level success, Diana," he continued, his tone mocking and cruel. "You tried your best, but my trajectory requires a partner who actually understands the intense demands of building a corporate empire. You are far too emotional, far too weak, and completely lacking in vision. I cannot allow your paranoid instability to drag my company down any further." Sienna smirked, picking up her wineglass and taking a delicate sip, clearly reveling in my public humiliation. Brenda stared at her plate, her jaw clenched tight, waiting for the massive cash payout that would supposedly save their family legacy. "Sign the papers," Diana Bradley commanded, pointing a finger directly at me. "You take your 50% of the mortgage debt as we agreed, you sign away the deed to this house, and you walk away quietly. If you pick up that pen and sign right now, I will honor our previous arrangement. I will let you keep the baby, and I will not force you into a psychiatric facility. Do it now, so Sienna and I can actually enjoy the rest of our holiday." I stared at the sleek silver pen resting on top of the fraudulent divorce papers. The entire dining room held its collective breath. Bradley leaned back in his chair, a look of absolute smug victory plastered across his handsome face. He genuinely thought he had broken me. He thought the horrific threat of losing my unborn child and being locked in a psychiatric ward had forced me into total submission. Sienna picked up her crystal wine glass again, ready to toast to my ultimate defeat. Brenda watched me with cold, impatient eyes, desperate for the signature that would supposedly save their crumbling family empire and restore their access to cash. I slowly reached out my hand. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the pen. I picked it up. Bradley let out a soft, arrogant exhale of relief, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. Then I gripped both ends of the expensive silver pen and snapped it completely in half. The sharp crack echoed through the silent dining room like a gunshot. Black ink splattered violently across the pristine white tablecloth and dotted the top page of his ridiculous divorce settlement. Bradley's smug smile vanished instantly. Sienna gasped, nearly dropping her wineglass onto her emerald dress. Brenda sat straight up in her chair, her eyes widening in absolute shock. The submissive, terrified, pregnant wife they had all expected to see was completely gone. I dropped the broken pieces of the pen onto the mahogany table and stood up. I did not shed a single tear. My hands were perfectly steady. I reached down to the heavy leather tote bag I had placed near my feet before dinner began. I pulled out 4 thick, tightly bound manila envelopes. Without saying a word, I tossed the first envelope down the length of the table. It slid perfectly across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Bradley. I tossed the second to Brenda and the third directly to Sienna. I kept the fourth one in my own hands. "What on earth is this?" Bradley demanded, his voice trembling with a sudden, unfamiliar panic. He stared at the thick envelope as if it were a live explosive. "I promised you I would sign documents tonight, Bradley," I said, my voice echoing with the cold, authoritative tone of a senior forensic auditor. "But I never said I would sign your extortionate divorce papers. Go ahead. Open the envelopes. Let us review the actual financial state of your incredible corporate empire." Jasmine, sitting to my right, calmly took a sip of her sparkling water and smiled. Brenda was the first to tear the envelope open. She pulled out the heavy stack of high-resolution PDF scans and began rapidly reading the top page. I watched the remaining color completely drain from her heavily powdered face. "That is a certified copy of a $2.5 million second mortgage contract on this house," I announced, clearly projecting my voice so every single word landed like a physical blow. "A loan you secretly took out against the property I purchased with my own savings. If you turn to the very last page, Bradley, you will see my signature on the dotted line. The only problem is I never signed that document. You forged my name to steal millions of dollars from the federal bank." Bradley ripped his envelope open, his hands shaking violently. He stared at the forged documents, his jaw dropping open in sheer terror. He looked up at me, his eyes darting frantically around the room. As a forensic financial auditor, I spend 40 hours a week hunting down hidden corporate assets for massive multinational conglomerates. I continued smoothly. "Did you honestly think you could hide a multi-million-dollar wire transfer from me? I cloned your phone while you were taking a shower. I downloaded your entire encrypted financial history before you even finished washing your hair." I pulled out my own copy of the documents and held up the wire transfer receipts. "The $2.5 million did not go into your failing tech startup, did it, Bradley? You told your mother that you were starving your disabled sister in a boiling attic to save the business. But you did not save the business. You washed the stolen mortgage money through 2 different international intermediary banks to hide the digital trail from the IRS." I turned my absolute freezing gaze directly to Sienna. She was frozen in her chair, staring at the papers in front of her. And then I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, "You wired every single penny of that $2.5 million into a private offshore trust fund registered in the Cayman Islands. A trust fund that lists your 27-year-old executive assistant as the sole primary beneficiary." Sienna went completely pale. The vibrant crimson of her lipstick suddenly looked grotesque against her ghostly white skin. She looked down at the documents, her eyes frantically scanning the undeniable proof of her offshore account. The $40,000 Cartier watch on her wrist suddenly looked like a massive, glittering pair of handcuffs. Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp and half scream. She slowly turned her head to look at her son. He had not just ruined the family name. He had stolen millions of dollars, committed massive federal bank fraud, and given the entire fortune to his mistress, while leaving his own mother to deal with the fallout of his bankrupt company. "You are done, Bradley," I said, tossing my stack of evidence onto his ruined divorce papers. "I have traced every single stolen penny, and I am not the only one who has seen these files." The heavy silence that followed my declaration was finally broken by the sharp scrape of a wooden chair. Brenda pushed herself up from the table, her hands trembling violently as she grabbed the edge of the polished mahogany wood for physical support. Despite the mountain of undeniable financial evidence sitting right in front of her, her deeply ingrained instinct to protect her golden child completely overrode any sense of logic. "This is a ridiculous, hysterical fabrication," Brenda declared, her voice shrill and desperate as she pointed a manicured finger directly down the length of the table at me. "You manufactured all of these documents just to ruin him because you are a bitter, jealous woman." Bradley is a brilliant executive. He would never be stupid enough to leave a digital trail like this. You hacked his phone and planted these files, Diana. I will personally hire the absolute best cybersecurity defense team in the country to prove you fabricated every single word of this nonsense. Save your money, Brenda Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the tense dining room air like a perfectly sharpened blade. Jasmine slowly stood up from her chair. She reached into the inside pocket of her tailored burgundy blazer and pulled out two thick, legally bound folders with bright red court seals officially stamped on the front covers. She walked deliberately around the table, her high heels clicking methodically on the hardwood floor, a sound that felt like a ticking clock marking the end of Bradley's empire. Jasmine stopped right behind Sienna's chair. She dropped the first heavy folder directly onto Sienna's plate, right on top of her untouched holiday meal. "Sienna, consider yourself officially served," Jasmine announced, her tone shifting into pure, ruthless corporate attorney mode. "That is a civil lawsuit filed by my law firm on behalf of my client Diana. We are suing you for massive financial damages relating to your direct participation in federal notary fraud. The state licensing board has already been formally notified, and your official notary bond has been immediately revoked. You are personally liable for the $2.5 million you helped steal, and we will be seizing every single asset currently in your name, including that beautiful $40,000 watch on your wrist." Sienna let out a terrified gasp, shrinking back into her chair as if the legal folder were physically burning her skin. She frantically reached for the clasp of the gold Cartier watch, her trembling fingers trying to pull it off her wrist, but she was shaking too badly. She looked up at Bradley, her eyes wide with panic, silently begging him to fix the nightmare. But Bradley was completely paralyzed. Jasmine took two more steps and stood directly over Bradley. She tossed the second red folder onto his chest. It bounced off his expensive suit lapel and landed heavily in his lap. "And for you, Bradley." Jasmine continued, her dark eyes flashing with years of suppressed anger over his arrogant, racist entitlement. "That is a formal, expedited audit notification from the Internal Revenue Service, coupled with a secondary freeze mandate from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Diana did not plant anything on your phone. She simply gave the federal government the exact roadmap they needed to verify what they already suspected." Bradley stared blindly down at the official government seal on the folder, his chest heaving erratically. "My accounts are frozen," he stammered, his voice barely a weak whisper. "But I have capital. I have massive equity in the tech company. I can easily leverage my shares to fight this." Jasmine let out a cold, humorless laugh that echoed harshly against the crystal chandelier above us. "You have absolutely nothing, Bradley. The federal audit was initiated 48 hours ago, and they move incredibly fast when millions of dollars are missing across international borders. The IRS has completely pierced your corporate veil. They know your startup has not generated a single dollar of actual profit in over 2 years." Jasmine leaned forward, placing both of her hands flat on the table, physically trapping him in his chair and forcing him to look her directly in the eyes. "Let us do the real math right now," Jasmine said, enunciating every single syllable with devastating clarity. "You owe $2.5 million on the fraudulent mortgage you secretly took out on this house. You owe another $2 million to your furious venture capital investors who now know you completely cooked your accounting books. And you owe hundreds of thousands in unpaid federal taxes and massive fraud penalties. You are not a millionaire tech visionary, Bradley. You are a pathetic criminal who is currently over $5 million in debt. Your company is dead. Your offshore accounts are red-flagged and locked by international banking authorities. You cannot access a single penny to hire a defense lawyer." Brenda collapsed heavily back into her dining chair, her legs completely giving out beneath her. The horrifying reality of her son's total financial ruin finally crushed her delusional defense. She put her hands over her face and began to sob loudly, mourning the immediate permanent death of her wealthy social status. Bradley looked like he was going to violently vomit. His face was the color of wet ash. He looked desperately at the fraudulent divorce papers sitting on the table, the papers he had arrogantly thought would save his life just 10 minutes ago. "You set me up," Bradley whispered, his eyes darting back and forth between Jasmine and me in pure terror. "You both set me up." "We did not forge the signatures, Bradley," I replied calmly from the far end of the table. "We did not steal from investors. We just turned on the bright lights so everyone could finally see exactly what kind of monster you really are." The final words were the absolute breaking point. Bradley stared at me, his eyes completely hollowed out by the terrifying reality of his total destruction. The meticulously constructed mask of the charming, wealthy tech visionary shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. What remained was just a desperate, cornered animal. A low, guttural roar of pure, unfiltered rage ripped from his throat. He planted both of his hands on the edge of the heavy mahogany dining table and violently shoved it forward. Crystal wine glasses tipped over, shattering against the hardwood floor. The massive roasted turkey slid off its silver platter, sending dark gravy spilling across the pristine white tablecloth. Bradley kicked his chair back so hard it crashed into the antique china cabinet behind him. He lunged down the length of the room, completely ignoring the ruined holiday feast. His hands were curled into tight fists, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, heading directly for me. Jasmine immediately stepped in front of me to block his path, her posture braced for a physical impact, but Bradley was moving with the blinding speed of absolute panic. Before his hands could even come close to touching us, a deafening crash echoed through the foyer. The heavy mahogany front door was violently kicked open, the reinforced deadbolt splintering the doorframe into pieces. Heavy tactical boots stomped rapidly against the marble entryway. "Seattle Police, nobody move," a booming, authoritative voice commanded. The dining room was instantly flooded with law enforcement. Local police officers in dark tactical gear swarmed through the archway, their hands resting securely on their heavy-duty belts. Right behind them were 4 agents wearing crisp navy blue windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across the back. The elegant, suffocating tension of our Thanksgiving dinner was completely obliterated by the overwhelming presence of federal authority. Bradley froze in his tracks, his hands still raised mid-lunge. An adrenaline-fueled local police officer tackled him from the side, sending Bradley crashing hard onto the polished wooden floor. His expensive Italian suit jacket tore at the shoulder as the officer forcefully pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing in the dining room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Get your hands off me!" Bradley screamed, thrashing wildly against the floorboards, his cheek pressed directly into the spilled gravy and shattered crystal. "Do you know who I am? I am a corporate executive. Call my lawyers right now." A tall, broad-shouldered FBI agent stepped forward, completely ignoring Bradley's frantic screaming. The agent pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and looked down at my husband with absolute disgust. "Bradley, you have the right to remain silent." The FBI agent recited, his voice calm, mechanical, and devastating. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?" Bradley just kept thrashing and cursing, his arrogant entitlement completely blinding him to his reality. The lead local detective stepped up right next to the FBI agent. "Bradley, we are executing a sealed felony arrest warrant issued by the county judge this afternoon," the detective announced loudly over the screaming. "You are being placed under arrest for severe felony-dependent abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and criminal neglect of a vulnerable minor." The FBI agent seamlessly picked up the list. "And you are also under federal arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and massive bank fraud relating to a $2.5 million real estate forgery." On the other side of the ruined dining table, Sienna let out a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. 2 local officers had her backed against the far wall. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her perfect makeup running in dark streaks down her pale face. "I did not do anything," Sienna screamed desperately, holding her hands up as an officer grabbed her wrists. "It was all him. He told me to stamp the papers. He told me the money was his. I am just his assistant. Please do not arrest me." "Sienna, you are under arrest for federal notary fraud and criminal conspiracy," a female FBI agent stated firmly, snapping a second pair of steel handcuffs around Sienna's wrists right next to the glittering $40,000 Cartier watch. "You can explain your administrative duties to the federal judge at your arraignment tomorrow morning." Brenda was still sitting in her chair, completely paralyzed by the chaotic scene unfolding around her. She watched in absolute silent horror as two police officers hauled her golden child up from the floor. Bradley's face was covered in dirt and spilled food, his expensive clothes ruined, his dignity entirely stripped away. He looked directly at his mother, his eyes pleading for her to use her wealth and influence to make this nightmare disappear. But Brenda just slowly turned her head away, covering her mouth with her trembling hands, finally realizing that no amount of country club money could ever fix a federal indictment. More agents moved through the house, actively securing the rooms and taking photographs of the property to document the crime scene. I stood quietly at the end of the table, Jasmine standing firmly by my side. We watched the federal agents march my husband and his mistress out of the dining room through the foyer and out into the cold November night, where a row of police cruisers with flashing red and blue lights were waiting to take them exactly where they belonged. The female FBI agent gave Sienna's handcuffs a sharp final tug. The physical reality of the cold steel biting into her wrists completely shattered whatever was left of Sienna's arrogant facade. She began thrashing against the officers holding her, her expensive emerald dress slipping awkwardly off her shoulder. "I did not know about the disabled sister," Sienna screamed, her voice echoing shrilly over the ruined Thanksgiving spread. "He told me the money was from an anonymous angel investor. He lied to me. He forged the signatures himself and just made me stamp them. I will testify against him. I will tell you everything about the offshore accounts. Just please do not put me in jail." Bradley twisted his neck violently, his cheek still smeared with dark turkey gravy, glaring at his mistress with pure venomous hatred. "Shut your mouth, you stupid girl!" he roared, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the officers gripping his arms. "You spent every single dime of that money. You are just as guilty as I am." The local police officers hauled Bradley roughly to his feet. He stumbled forward, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the spilled wine and broken crystals scattered across the hardwood floor. He was no longer looking at Sienna or me. He locked his wild, desperate eyes entirely on his mother. Brenda was still frozen in her dining chair, her hands trembling as she clutched her pearl necklace. "Mom, you have to do something!" Bradley cried, his voice dropping from a furious roar to a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Call Judge Harrison. Call the bank. Liquidate your retirement portfolio and post my bail. You cannot let them take me to a federal holding cell. I am your son. You have to fix this." Brenda slowly lowered her hands from her face. She looked at the ruined dining room, the shattered china, the federal agents securing the crime scene, and finally, at the pathetic, sobbing man she had spent 35 years spoiling and protecting. The intense protective delusion that had driven her to help lock a disabled teenage girl in a boiling attic finally evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating instinct for sheer self-preservation. "I cannot fix federal bank fraud, Bradley," Brenda whispered, her voice trembling but incredibly cold. "If I transfer a single penny of my money to you right now, the IRS will freeze my accounts too. You lied to me about the medical funds. You humiliated this family for a cheap mistress. You are entirely on your own." Bradley's jaw dropped open in absolute devastating shock. The ultimate safety net he had relied on for his entire life had just been ruthlessly pulled out from under him. The police officers did not give him any time to process the betrayal. They grabbed him by the shoulders and began forcefully marching him out of the dining room, dragging him past the antique furniture and into the brightly lit foyer. As they pulled him toward the shattered front door, a final desperate surge of spite suddenly possessed him. He realized his life was completely over, but he wanted to make sure mine was destroyed too. He dug the heels of his shoes into the marble floor, forcing the officers to drag his dead weight. He twisted his head back to look at me, standing calmly by the dining table. "You think you won?" Diana Bradley screamed, his face completely red and slick with sweat. "You think you are so incredibly smart. But you are still legally tied to that second mortgage. The bank will realize the loan is entirely fraudulent by tomorrow morning. They will demand the $2.5 million in full. You will lose this fancy house. They will foreclose on you, and you will be raising that baby in a homeless shelter. You get absolutely nothing." I picked up a clean linen napkin from the table, casually wiped a tiny drop of spilled wine from my fingers, and slowly walked out into the foyer to face him. I stood just 3 feet away from my husband, looking down at his ruined, pathetic state. I smiled. It was the most genuine, deeply satisfying smile I had felt in 5 long years. "You really should have paid more attention to my career, Bradley," I said, my voice echoing with absolute freezing clarity in the marble entryway. "I am a forensic financial auditor. I tipped off the bank about the forged signatures 2 months ago, long before I even contacted the federal agents. When they realized the massive loan was completely unrecoverable due to your pending criminal charges, they quietly sold the defaulted debt to an anonymous private buyer for pennies on the dollar, just to clear it off their active ledgers." Bradley's eyes widened, a new wave of horrific realization washing over his face. "I bought the debt, Bradley," I stated smoothly. "I set up an anonymous holding company using my own clean, untouched savings and purchased the defaulted mortgage from the bank. I own this house completely free and clear. I own the remaining equity, and I officially hold the legal title. You have been living in my house as a trespasser for weeks. Now get off my property." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind the officers, instantly cutting off Bradley's frantic screaming. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers parked on the street painted eerie spinning shadows across the marble walls of the foyer. I stood completely still for a moment, listening to the engines rev and the tires roll away, taking my nightmare of a husband out of my life forever. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The air in the house suddenly felt lighter, as if a massive, suffocating weight had just been physically lifted from the foundation. I turned my back on the front door and walked slowly back into the ruined dining room. Jasmine was standing quietly near the antique china cabinet, her arms crossed securely over her tailored burgundy blazer, watching the aftermath with absolute professional satisfaction. A few federal agents were still moving methodically through the house, snapping photographs and securing digital devices, but they paid no attention to the family drama concluding in the center of the room. Brenda was still standing exactly where she had been when Bradley was dragged away. She was trembling so violently that her heavy pearl necklace rattled audibly against her collarbone. She looked down at the massive Thanksgiving turkey lying sideways on the mahogany table, the dark gravy staining her expensive white linen tablecloth. She looked at the shattered crystal wine glasses and the broken pieces of the silver pen resting on top of the fraudulent divorce papers. The complete and total destruction of her pristine, wealthy world was perfectly mirrored in the absolute wreckage of the dining room. Her golden child, the son she had ruthlessly protected and enabled for 35 years, was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser, in ruined clothes, facing over a decade in federal prison. The multi-million-dollar tech company was a complete illusion. The offshore money was frozen. Her pristine country club reputation was completely obliterated, and the disabled daughter she had so easily cast aside and locked in a sweltering attic was now legally out of her control forever. Brenda slowly raised her head and looked at me. Her heavy, expensive makeup was smeared under her eyes, making her look exhausted, hollow, and suddenly very old. I watched her sophisticated, arrogant brain rapidly try to calculate a new survival strategy. With Bradley gone and his money frozen, she needed a new anchor. She needed a new host to attach herself to so she could maintain her comfortable lifestyle. She took a hesitant, trembling step toward me, her face contorted into a mask of profound manufactured grief. She forced tears to pool in her eyes, clasping her manicured hands together in front of her chest in a desperate plea for sympathy. "Diana, please," Brenda whispered, her voice shaking with a pathetic, dramatic fragility. I had absolutely no idea he was doing any of this. "You have to believe me. He lied to me, just like he lied to you. I am completely devastated. I did not move a single muscle." I just stared at her, letting her pathetic performance hang awkwardly in the silent room. "We have both been terribly victimized by him," Brenda continued, taking another cautious step forward, reaching her hand out as if she wanted to touch my shoulder. "But we cannot let his terrible mistakes destroy what is left of us. You are carrying my grandchild, Diana. You are still my family. We need to stick together now more than ever. I can help you with the baby. I can move in and help you manage this massive house. We are still family." I looked down at her outstretched hand, feeling a wave of absolute freezing disgust wash over my entire body. I slapped her hand away with a sharp, forceful motion that made her physically recoil. "Do not you ever dare use that word with me again," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "Family. You think you can invoke the word family to save yourself after what I saw upstairs? You knew exactly what he was doing to Lily. You stood right there on the staircase and told me you helped him lock her in that attic. You looked me right in the eyes and threatened to have my baby taken away by Child Protective Services. You threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward so your son could steal my house and buy diamonds for his mistress." Brenda flinched, opening her mouth to stammer another lie, but I stepped directly into her personal space, forcing her to back up against the edge of the ruined dining table. "You do not care about me, and you certainly do not care about this unborn child," I continued, enunciating every single word with razor-sharp precision. "You only care about the fact that I am the only person left in this room who actually has any money. You are looking at a completely empty bank account and a son in a federal penitentiary, and you are desperately trying to find a new wallet. It is absolutely pathetic. Diana, you cannot just throw me out," Brenda cried, real panic, finally bleeding into her voice as she realized her manipulation was completely failing. "I am a respected member of this community. I am a mother. You are an accomplice to felony child abuse," Jasmine interrupted smoothly, stepping up right next to me. "And if you do not want to be wearing a matching pair of steel handcuffs tonight, I strongly suggest you listen very carefully to what the legal owner of this property is about to tell you." I raised my left wrist and deliberately checked my watch. "I own this house, Brenda," I stated, my voice echoing with total, unbreakable authority. "I hold the deed and I am the sole legal resident. You are currently standing in my dining room completely uninvited. You have exactly 60 seconds to turn around, walk out that front door, and get off my property. If you are still standing in my house when that minute is up, I will simply ask one of these lovely federal agents to arrest you for criminal trespassing." Brenda's eyes widened in absolute terror. She looked at Jasmine, then at the federal agent securing evidence in the living room, and finally back at me. She saw absolutely zero mercy in my eyes. The countdown had already begun. She let out a strangled, humiliated sob. She frantically grabbed her expensive designer handbag from the floor, nearly tripping over her own high heels as she practically sprinted out of the dining room. Jasmine and I stood side by side, watching in profound, silent satisfaction as the grand matriarch of the family scrambled through the foyer like a terrified rat fleeing a sinking ship. She ran out into the cold November night, abandoning her son, her dignity, and her ruined legacy entirely. The front door remained wide open, letting the crisp, fresh autumn air finally flow freely into my home. 8 months later, the crisp autumn air of that Thanksgiving night had long been replaced by the sweltering July heat. I sat comfortably in the polished wooden gallery of the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle. I was no longer pregnant. My beautiful, perfectly healthy baby girl was sleeping safely at home in her bright, newly renovated nursery. I wore a sharp, tailored white blazer, projecting the absolute calm and control I had fought so hard to reclaim. At the front of the massive courtroom, the reality of the federal justice system was completely crushing my former husband and his mistress. Bradley sat at the defense table, looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant tech executive he used to be. His hair was thinning rapidly, and without his hidden offshore wealth to pay for elite defense attorneys, he was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by his overwhelmed public defender. Sienna sat at a separate table, aggressively avoiding eye contact with him. Desperate to save herself, Sienna had turned state's evidence. She accepted a preliminary plea deal from the federal prosecutor, agreeing to testify against Bradley in exchange for a lighter sentence. When she took the witness stand, she wore a modest drab beige cardigan, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She sobbed theatrically, claiming she was just a naive, terrified assistant who had been completely manipulated by a powerful CEO. She swore under oath that she had no idea the mortgage documents were forged and claimed she never touched the offshore money. But her pathetic performance did not last. Jasmine, acting as the lead attorney for my attached civil restitution case, was granted permission by the federal judge to cross-examine the witness regarding the stolen financial assets. Jasmine stood up, buttoned her emerald green suit jacket, and approached the witness stand like a lethal predator cornering its prey. "You claim you were completely unaware of the financial fraud," Miss Sienna. Jasmine began, her voice ringing with terrifying authority. "You claim you were just a terrified victim following administrative orders." "Yes," Sienna whimpered, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. "I just stamped what he told me to stamp. I did not know it was illegal." Jasmine smiled a cold, devastating smile. She picked up a thick tablet from the prosecutor's desk and tapped the screen. "Then, how do you explain the digital login records from the Cayman Islands banking portal?" Jasmine asked, her voice echoing sharply across the silent room. Federal cyber investigators confirmed that the offshore account holding the stolen $2.5 million was accessed exactly 42 times over the course of 3 months. And the biometric security measure used to authorize those logins was not Bradley's face. It was yours. Sienna froze, the tissue dropping from her trembling hands. Furthermore, Jasmine continued, relentlessly closing in, "We have the receipt for the $40,000 Cartier watch you wore to Thanksgiving dinner. The purchase was made using a wire transfer directly from that same offshore account, authorized by your personal digital signature. Are you telling this court that you accidentally transferred $40,000 of stolen money to buy yourself diamonds?" Sienna stammered, her eyes darting frantically toward the judge, but she had absolutely nowhere to run. Jasmine systematically dismantled every single lie, exposing Sienna as a willing, greedy co-conspirator. By the time Jasmine finished her ruthless cross-examination, Sienna's plea deal was completely voided due to blatant perjury on the witness stand. Bradley did not fare any better. When the federal judge finally delivered the sentencing, his gavel struck the heavy wooden block with a sound that signaled absolute finality. Bradley was sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for wire fraud, identity theft, and felony dependent abuse. He wept openly as the bailiffs handcuffed him, but I felt absolutely nothing but relief. Sienna, stripped of her protective plea deal, was sentenced to 5 hard years in a federal women's prison. I glanced toward the very back row of the courtroom gallery, where Brenda sat entirely alone. The transformation of my former mother-in-law was almost difficult to comprehend. Her heavy gold jewelry and designer clothes were completely gone. After the massive federal scandal broke, Bradley's furious venture capital investors had filed aggressive civil lawsuits against anyone tied to the company. Brenda had been forced to liquidate her sprawling estate and drain her retirement accounts just to settle the massive legal penalties. Her wealthy country club friends had immediately shunned her, treating her like a highly contagious disease. She now lived in a tiny, noisy studio apartment next to a busy highway. She was completely estranged from her remaining family. Derek, utterly disgusted by her involvement in Lily's horrific abuse, had cut her out of his life entirely. Brenda watched her golden child get led away in chains, her face pale and sunken. She had sacrificed every ounce of her morality for wealth and status, and in the end she was left with absolutely nothing. When the following spring finally arrived, marking a full year since the nightmare of that Thanksgiving dinner, my home was completely unrecognizable. The heavy, oppressive energy that Bradley and his mother had infused into the very walls of the house had been thoroughly eradicated. I had hired a team of contractors to completely gut and renovate the interior. We tore up the dark hardwood floors and replaced them with light, warm oak. We stripped away the heavy, pretentious wallpaper and painted every single room in bright, airy tones. The house was no longer a cold fortress designed to impress wealthy venture capitalists or project a fake image of aristocratic perfection. It was a warm, welcoming sanctuary. The most significant architectural change happened on the second floor. I could not bear the thought of walking past that hallway, knowing what had happened behind that door. I instructed the contractors to completely dismantle the entrance to the attic. They removed the heavy wooden door, tore out the frame, and sealed the entire space with thick layers of drywall and soundproofing insulation. They smoothed the walls perfectly and painted over the area until it seamlessly blended into the rest of the hallway. The dark, terrifying prison where Lily had suffered was sealed off forever. It was as if the room had never even existed. Instead of focusing on the past, I poured all of my energy and resources into the future. That future was perfectly embodied by my beautiful, healthy baby girl. I named her Maya. She was born in the early weeks of spring, arriving with a loud, demanding cry and a head full of thick, dark hair. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt an overwhelming surge of protective power. Bradley would never meet her. He would never hold her, manipulate her, or use her as a pawn in his twisted games. Maya was entirely mine, and she was growing up in an environment defined by absolute safety and unconditional love. But the most profound and beautiful transformation in our new life belonged to Lily. When I secured permanent legal guardianship, my first priority was giving her the dignity she had been violently denied. We took the massive first-floor guest suite and completely redesigned it specifically for her complex medical needs. We widened the doorways for her custom wheelchair and installed a state-of-the-art accessible bathroom. We replaced the standard windows with massive glass French doors that opened directly onto a private sunlit garden patio filled with blooming hydrangeas and fragrant lavender. Lily was absolutely thriving. Under the dedicated daily care of professional in-home nurses and specialized pediatric physical therapists, she had made miraculous progress. She was no longer the terrified, emaciated teenager shivering on a stained mattress. She had gained 30 pounds of healthy weight. Her skin was glowing, her eyes were bright and alert, and she no longer flinched when someone entered her room. We had successfully recovered the remainder of her inheritance trust from Bradley's frozen assets, and every single penny went directly toward her rehabilitation. We purchased an advanced eye-tracking communication tablet that finally gave her a voice. For the first time in her life, she could tell us what she wanted to eat, what music she wanted to listen to, and when she wanted to go outside. Jasmine became a permanent fixture in our daily lives. She officially accepted the role of Maya's godmother and visited the house multiple times a week. After securing her named partnership at the law firm, she used her newfound influence to establish a pro bono legal clinic specializing in financial abuse cases. We would often sit on the back patio with glasses of iced tea, watching Lily work with her physical therapist on the lawn. Jasmine and I had forged a bond that transcended mere friendship or legal representation. We were sisters forged in the absolute fires of a corporate war. One afternoon, while I was holding Maya near Lily's specialized chair, the robotic voice of the communication tablet suddenly spoke into the quiet room. "Love, baby sister." It was the very first time Lily had independently formed a complete emotional sentence. I burst into tears, leaning down to press my forehead against hers. That single moment validated every terrifying risk I had taken. My favorite part of every single day was our new morning routine. I would carry Maya downstairs, brew a fresh pot of coffee, and walk into Lily's sunlit room. We would open the French doors to let the crisp spring breeze roll in from the garden. There was no more shouting in the kitchen. There were no more terrifying threats whispered in the dark. The relentless anxiety was gone. I had taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into a foundation of absolute peace. We were safe, and we were finally free. By late August, that fresh spring breeze had turned into the thick golden warmth of a perfect Seattle summer. We decided to host a backyard barbecue to celebrate Jasmine's official promotion to named partner at her law firm. It was a small, intimate gathering completely devoid of the suffocating, pretentious atmosphere that used to plague this house. There were no venture capitalists to impress, no expensive catering companies to manage, and absolutely no toxic family members silently judging my every move. It was just us, the people who actually mattered. I stood on the beautiful cedar deck we had built right outside Lily's room, using a pair of silver tongs to flip thick, juicy burgers on the grill. The smell of charred cedar and sweet barbecue sauce filled the warm afternoon air. I looked out over the lush green lawn and let a profound wave of contentment wash over me. Jasmine was sitting on a brightly colored picnic blanket, spread out over the soft grass. She was no longer wearing her intimidating tailored corporate suits. Instead, she looked incredibly relaxed in a simple yellow sundress, her bare feet resting in the clover. She was holding my daughter Maya high up in the air, making ridiculous, exaggerated faces that caused the baby to let out loud, infectious peals of laughter. Maya was 5 months old now, a chubby, incredibly happy baby who only knew a world filled with safety and affection. She reached her tiny hands down to grab at Jasmine's hair, and the ruthless corporate attorney who had single-handedly dismantled my husband's criminal empire just giggled and pulled the baby in for a tight hug. Right beside them, resting comfortably in her customized all-terrain outdoor chair, was Lily. She was wearing a bright pink sun hat to protect her healthy, glowing skin from the summer rays. She watched Jasmine and the baby with a massive, genuine smile stretching across her face. A plate of perfectly grilled vegetables and soft buttered bread sat on the tray attached to her chair. She reached out with steady, practiced movements to pick up a piece of bread, a simple act of physical independence that would have been completely impossible just a year ago. She tapped the screen of her communication tablet, and the robotic voice chimed cheerfully over the sound of the sizzling grill. "More food, please?" Jasmine laughed loudly, carefully sitting Maya down on the blanket before turning to Lily. "You heard the boss," Diana. Jasmine called out to me, waving her hand toward the grill. "Stop daydreaming and bring us those burgers. We are starving over here." I laughed, pulling the perfectly cooked food from the hot grates and piling it onto a large ceramic platter. I walked down the wooden steps and joined my chosen family on the grass. We ate, we joked, and we simply enjoyed the profound, beautiful peace of a life completely free from fear and manipulation. As I sat there watching Lily gently stroke Maya's soft cheek, I thought about the terrifying journey that had brought me to this exact moment. I looked directly into the camera of my own memory, ready to share the most important lesson I had learned from the darkest chapter of my life. If you are watching this and you are currently trapped in a toxic family dynamic, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Society constantly pushes this dangerous romanticized narrative that blood is thicker than water. We are taught to endure unimaginable emotional and financial abuse simply because the people hurting us happen to share our DNA or our last name. We are conditioned to believe that setting firm boundaries is an act of betrayal. But I am here to tell you that true family has absolutely nothing to do with biology or legal marriage certificates. A real family does not view you as a financial asset to be drained or a naive pawn to be manipulated. A real family does not lock the vulnerable in a dark room to protect a fake public image. True family is entirely about mutual respect. It is about the people who stand fiercely by your side when your entire world is collapsing. It is about protecting the innocent, fighting for the vulnerable, and constantly choosing to uplift one another without demanding anything in return. Jasmine and Lily are not my blood, but they are my family in the purest, most undeniable sense of the word. When you finally decide to walk away from toxic abusers, they will try to convince you that you are making a massive mistake. They will tell you that you will fail, that you will lose everything, and that you will end up completely alone. Do not listen to them. Knowing your own worth is the most dangerous weapon you can ever possess against a narcissist. Bradley thought my silence meant I was weak. He thought my kindness was a liability he could easily exploit. He is currently sitting in a tiny concrete federal prison cell, entirely forgotten by the wealthy society he worships. Meanwhile, I am sitting in the warm summer sun, surrounded by laughter, love, and absolute financial security. Do not ever be afraid to burn down a toxic bridge if it means saving yourself. The ultimate sweetest revenge you can ever achieve is not the legal victory or the financial ruin of your enemies. The ultimate revenge is simply living a beautiful, peaceful, and profoundly authentic life without them. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family member, or if you have successfully built your own chosen family, please share your journey in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember to always know your worth. You are far stronger than they will ever understand. The harrowing journey we just witnessed serves as a powerful reminder that blood does not automatically equal family. For years, society has conditioned us to believe that we must endure abuse, manipulation, and severe disrespect simply because the perpetrators share our DNA or hold a legal marriage certificate. This story completely shatters that dangerous, outdated illusion. We saw exactly how a wealthy, pristine public image was aggressively used to mask horrific cruelty, and how the very people who were supposed to offer unconditional protection became the ultimate source of danger. The most profound lesson here is that true family is built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, genuine safety, and a shared commitment to protecting the vulnerable. It is entirely about the people who stand fiercely by your side when the comfortable facade finally crumbles, just like the unbreakable bond formed between the courageous protagonist, her brilliant sister-in-law, and the rescued teenager. Walking away from a highly toxic environment is often falsely painted as an act of betrayal or failure by the abusers who desperately want to maintain their manipulative control over you. But in reality, walking away is the ultimate act of self-preservation and profound self-love. When you finally recognize your own inherent worth, the empty threats and calculated manipulation of a narcissist lose all of their paralyzing power. You realize that you do not ever have to negotiate your peace, your sanity, or your physical safety to keep people in your life who only view you as a disposable asset. You have the absolute right to curate your inner circle and build a chosen family. Take a close look at the relationships in your life today and bravely cut ties with anyone who consistently costs you your peace.